Welcome to In the Shadows. I'm Jack, your guide tonight. We share scary horror stories to fall asleep to, with the sound of rain in the background, no ads, no interruptions, just a black screen and the stories waiting to unfold. Comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm wondering how far this show reaches, and grateful you're here tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe since there will be no breaks. Settle in and let the shadows speak. It started the day I moved into that old house. To be honest, I wasn't really thinking much about it at the time. I had just lost my wife a few months back, and I think I was in that kind of fog where you're just on autopilot. Like, sure, let's buy a creepy old house in the middle of nowhere because that's definitely what I need right now. Looking back, part of me knew it was a bad idea, but I didn't care. You know how it is. Grief does weird things to you. The place was cheap. That's what caught my eye first. Way too cheap for a house that size. It was one of those old colonial-style homes, sitting way out on the edge of town, kind of isolated, but still close enough to the grocery store and the one sad diner everyone goes to on weekends. It needed work, though. A lot of work. I'd convinced myself that fixing it up would keep me busy, keep my mind off things, give me a project to focus on. But of course, you never really get over something like losing your wife. You just sort of find ways to distract yourself. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. Anyway, I moved in on a Thursday. I remember because it was raining. Like really raining. Pouring in that way where you can barely see a few feet ahead of you, and the roads turn into rivers. It was one of those nights where everything just feels heavier, I got all my boxes inside, dumped them in the living room, and cracked open a beer. Just sat on the floor because I hadn't even set up any furniture yet. For a while, it was fine. Just me, the sound of rain pounding against the windows, and the smell of wet cardboard boxes all around me. I actually felt kind of okay for the first time in a while. But then, I started hearing this weird noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was the rain, like maybe the water was seeping in through the foundation or something. Old houses like that have a million problems, right? But this wasn't just water dripping. It was more like this low, steady thumping sound. Almost like a heartbeat, but not quite. Just slow and rhythmic. I was tired though, and part of me was just like, whatever, I'll deal with it tomorrow. So I did what any rational person would do. I ignored it. Went upstairs to the bedroom, lay down on the mattress I'd dragged in, and tried to sleep. Except the noise didn't stop. It wasn't loud or anything, just constant, like this subtle thrum in the background that you can't quite shake. I told myself it was nothing. I mean, it's an old house. Old houses make noise, right? But that didn't stop me from tossing and turning all night. Eventually, I guess I must have passed out because when I woke up, it was morning. The rain had stopped and everything was just damp and gray outside. The basement noise was gone too. Like it had never been there in the first place. So, I shrugged it off. Went about my day, unpacked some more, started figuring out what needed fixing. I even told myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Wouldn't be the first time I'd gotten too caught up in my own head, especially after everything with my wife. But then, that night, it came back. Same sound, that same slow, steady thumping. This time though, it was louder. So night 2 rolls around, and that damn sound is back. I try to ignore it, but let me tell you, once you start paying attention to something like that, it just digs into your brain. No matter how hard you try to brush it off. By midnight, it was driving me nuts. It wasn't like a normal creak or pipe noise either. It was almost like the house itself was breathing or something. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's how it felt. Finally, I figured I'd go check it out. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's probably some plumbing issue, or maybe a squirrel got stuck down there, right? So I grabbed my flashlight, because of course the basement light doesn't work, because why would it? And I head down those old wooden stairs. The basement's cold, like colder than the rest of the house, which makes no sense because it's been humid as hell all day with the rain. I start looking around, and nothing at first. Just your usual musty basement. Concrete floors, stone walls, boxes of junk left behind by the previous owner. But then I noticed something strange in the far corner. It was this section of the wall that looked off. Like the stones didn't quite line up the way they should have. One part of the wall seemed newer than the rest, almost like someone had patched it up at some point, but didn't finish the job. I'm standing there, staring at it, when I hear the noise again, that slow rhythmic thump. Only this time, it's louder, almost like it's coming from inside the wall. I swear, part of me thought, screw this, just leave it. But another part, I don't know, curiosity or stupidity, probably both, made me want to get closer. I step up to the wall, and that's when I see it. A door. It wasn't there before, I swear it wasn't. But now, plain as day, this old wooden door with a brass handle, just sitting there. Except it wasn't normal. There was something weird about the way it looked, like it was older than everything else down there. And the symbols, there were these strange markings all around the edges, carved into the wood. But I couldn't tell you what they meant. I stand there, just staring at it, trying to wrap my head around what I'm seeing. Part of me is thinking, this has got to be some trick. I'm tired, I'm stressed, this isn't real. But the other part of me, the part that wanted to see what was behind it. I reached for the handle, cold, like ice cold, even though it was warm everywhere else. I tried turning it, but locked. I should have left it alone. I should have gone back upstairs and called it a night, but something about that door just stuck with me. So I went back up to bed, tried to sleep, and figured I'd look into it the next day. Except, when I went down there in the morning, the door was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. I even ran my hand over the stone where it had been, trying to find any trace of it, but the wall was solid. Part of me started questioning my sanity at that point. Was it the grief messing with my head? Stress? Lack of sleep? I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't want to know. But I couldn't shake it. That night, though, I knew I had to go back down there, because the sound came back. So, night 2 rolls around, and that damn sound is back. I try to ignore it, but let me tell you, once you start paying attention to something like that, it just digs into your brain. No matter how hard you try to brush it off. By midnight, it was driving me nuts. It wasn't like a normal creak or pipe noise either. It was almost like the house itself was breathing or something. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's how it felt. Finally, I figured I'd go check it out. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's probably some plumbing issue, or maybe a squirrel got stuck down there, right? So I grabbed my flashlight, because, of course, the basement light doesn't work. Because, why would it? And I head down those old wooden stairs. The basement's cold, like colder than the rest of the house, which makes no sense because it's been humid as hell all day with the rain. I start looking around, and nothing, at first. Just your usual musty basement. Concrete floors, stone walls, boxes of junk left behind by the previous owner. But then I noticed something strange in the far corner. It was this section of the wall that looked off. Like the stones didn't quite line up the way they should have. One part of the wall seemed newer than the rest, almost like someone had patched it up at some point, but didn't finish the job. I'm standing there staring at it when I hear the noise again. That slow, rhythmic thump. Only this time, it's louder, almost like it's coming from inside the wall. I swear, part of me thought, screw this, just leave it. But another part, I don't know. Curiosity or stupidity, probably both, made me want to get closer. I step up to the wall, and that's when I see it. A door. It wasn't there before, I swear it wasn't. But now, plain as day, this old wooden door with a brass handle, just sitting there. Except it wasn't normal. There was something weird about the way it looked, like it was older than everything else down there. And the symbols, there were these strange markings all around the edges, carved into the wood, but I couldn't tell you what they meant. I stand there, just staring at it, trying to wrap my head around what I'm seeing. Part of me is thinking this has got to be some trick. I'm tired, I'm stressed, this isn't real. But the other part of me, the part that wanted to see what was behind it, I reached for the handle. Cold. Like ice cold, even though it was warm everywhere else. I tried turning it, but locked. I should have left it alone. I should have gone back upstairs and called it a night, but something about that door just stuck with me. So I went back up to bed, tried to sleep, and figured I'd look into it the next day. Except when I went down there in the morning, the door was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. I even ran my hand over the stone where it had been, trying to find any trace of it. But the wall was solid. Part of me started questioning my sanity at that point. Was it the grief messing with my head? Stress? Lack of sleep? I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't want to know. But I couldn't shake it. That night, though, I knew I had to go back down there. Because the sound came back. So the next night rolls around, and sure enough, the sound comes back. Same slow thump, 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 like it's calling me or something. I don't know why, but this time I'm ready for it. It's weird. Normally, I just brush this off, but there was something about that door. That damn door. So I grab my flashlight again, head down to the basement. And there it is. Right in the same spot as before, the door's just sitting there like it had never disappeared. At this point, part of me is telling myself, don't be an idiot, just leave it alone. But of course, I didn't listen. I couldn't. I reach for the handle again, and this time it turns. The door creaks open, slow and loud like it hasn't been opened in years. But what's behind it? It wasn't at all what I was expecting. I mean, you'd think a door in the basement of your house would lead to, I don't know, another room or maybe a root cellar or something. But no, it was a hallway. Not a regular hallway, either. This thing was long, way longer than the basement should have allowed for. The walls were rough stone, damp, like they'd been carved out of the earth, and the air was cold, even colder than before, and kind of stale, like nobody had been down there for centuries. And there was this weird light, like the kind of dim light you get from a candle, but I couldn't see any candles or lamps. It was just there. I stood there for a minute, just staring into the hallway, wondering if I'd finally lost it. I should have turned around and closed the door right then, but of course I didn't. Instead, I stepped inside. The second I crossed that threshold, I felt off. Like I wasn't where I was supposed to be, you know? The air felt wrong. Heavier, maybe. The walls seemed to hum, just a low vibration that ran through the stone. But what really got me were the whispers. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just some trick my brain was playing on me. But the further I walked, the clearer they got. Voices. One of them sounded like my wife. I stopped dead in my tracks. I swear to you, I heard her. It was faint, but I know it was her. Calling my name, like she was somewhere in that hallway, just out of reach. I called out like an idiot. Sarah? No answer, of course. Just more whispers. I kept walking, though, because that's what you do, right? You hear your dead wife's voice, you follow it. It didn't feel like I was going in a straight line. The hallway started twisting, turning in ways that didn't make sense. I was getting disoriented, but I couldn't stop. After what felt like hours, I reached the end. There was a room. Not much in it, just this big old mirror hanging on the far wall, covered in dust. But when I looked into it, it wasn't me staring back. It was some old guy, gray hair, sunken eyes. I had no idea who he was at first, but then it clicked. Harold Finn. The guy who used to own the house. The guy who vanished. He didn't say anything. Just stared at me through the mirror like he'd been waiting for me. And then, the mirror cracked. Loud as hell, like a gunshot. Next thing I know, I'm back in the basement. The door's gone again, and I'm lying flat on my back, staring at the ceiling like I'd just woken up from a bad dream. Except it wasn't a dream. I knew that for sure because I could still feel the cold from that hallway clinging to my skin, and I could still hear the faint echo of Sarah's voice, whispering my name from somewhere I couldn't reach, somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to reach. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the door and the hallway and Harold Finn. I mean, what the hell was going on? A door that only shows up at night? A hallway that shouldn't exist? And Harold Finn staring back at me through that cracked mirror like he knew something I didn't? I couldn't just ignore it. So, I started digging around, trying to find out more about the house. I figured maybe there was something in the town's history, some local legend or weird story that might explain what was going on. I went to the library. Yeah, I know, sounds like the setup to every horror movie ever, right? The new guy in town poking around for secrets in a dusty old library. But I had no choice. I needed answers. Turns out, the house had been empty for years after Harold Finn disappeared. Nobody wanted it, which, honestly, made sense. Who wants to buy a house where the last owner just vanished? But then I found this article buried in the archives. It was from the local paper, dated about 15 years ago. The headline was something like, "Local historian missing, rumored to have been investigating the threshold." That word, threshold, jumped out at me. Apparently, Harold Finn had been obsessed with this idea of doorways between worlds. He believed there were places on Earth, certain spots, where the line between our world and whatever's on the other side is thin. Thin enough to cross over, if he knew where to look. The article mentioned how he'd been doing all this research on ancient myths and folklore about portals, and that he thought he'd found one in the basement of his own damn house. I sat there in the library for what felt like hours, just staring at that article, trying to make sense of it. Harold Finn thought that door led to somewhere else, somewhere between life and death. And part of me, the part that had heard Sarah's voice, started to believe it too. But here's the thing. If that door was a way to the other side, where the hell did it lead? And more importantly, how the hell did you get back? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah. What if she was there, wherever there was? What if that door was my only chance to see her again? I know it sounds crazy, but grief does that to you. It makes you cling to things that don't make sense. So I went back down to the basement, just like before. I waited for the door to appear. And when it did, I wasn't surprised anymore. It was almost like it was waiting for me. Like it knew I'd come back. This time I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, stepped into that hallway, and started walking. The whispers came again, just like last time. Sarah's voice, clearer now, calling to me from somewhere up ahead. The hallway twisted and turned, but this time I felt like I knew where I was going. I reached the end quicker, like the place was pulling me in faster this time. And there was that room again. The same cracked mirror on the wall, the same cold, stale air. But this time, Harold Finn wasn't waiting for me. Instead, it was Sarah. She was standing there, right in front of the mirror, just staring at me. I swear on my life, it was her. But something wasn't right. She didn't look like the Sarah I remembered. She was off somehow. Her skin was pale, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years, and her eyes, they weren't hers. They were darker, emptier, like something else was looking out through them. She didn't speak, just smiled at me, this cold, unnatural smile. And then she whispered my name. Not the way she used to, but different, distant. I wanted to go to her, but something in the back of my mind was screaming at me not to. This wasn't Sarah. It looked like her, sounded like her, but whatever it wasn't her. I took a step back. And that's when the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but the door was gone. Just like before. Except this time, I wasn't waking up in the basement. I was still in that hallway, and Sarah, or whatever she was, started walking toward me. That's when I realized I wasn't going to find Sarah here, but something else sure as hell had found me. So there I was, stuck in that hallway, with whatever that was, coming toward me. And yeah, it looked like Sarah, sort of, but it wasn't her. Not anymore. I couldn't move. Not because I was frozen or anything like that, but because I knew if I made the wrong move, I might never get out of there. I swear, I just stood there, staring at her, and trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. She was getting closer, smiling that cold, twisted smile. And all I could hear was my name, over and over again, coming out of her mouth, but in this low, unnatural voice that just made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe longer. But eventually something in me clicked, and I knew I had to get the hell out of there. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, hoping, praying, that the door was still there. That hallway felt like it was stretching out even longer, like I was running but not getting anywhere. The whispers were getting louder, not just Sarah's voice anymore, but a whole mess of voices, overlapping, echoing, filling my head with all these things I didn't want to hear. I kept running. The hallway twisted and turned, just like before, but I was barely paying attention to where I was going. I just kept moving. And then, there it was, the door. I didn't stop to think, didn't even hesitate. I grabbed the handle, yanked it open, and threw myself through it. Next thing I know, I'm back in the basement. flat on my back, just like before. But this time, something felt different. The door was gone again, of course, but the whole basement, it felt heavier, like something had followed me back. I lay there for a minute, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of everything. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was safe, that whatever that thing was, whatever Sarah had become, was still on the other side. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had crossed over with me. I could feel it, just out of reach, like it was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to show itself. I tried to brush it off, went upstairs, sat down on the couch, and tried to convince myself I was losing it, that it was all in my head, that the grief was finally catching up to me. But I knew better. I spent the next few days trying to avoid the basement, telling myself that as long as I stayed away, I'd be fine, and it worked for a while. But then, a few nights later, I heard it again. That slow, steady thump, coming from the basement. I didn't go down there. Not this time. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to that sound, knowing exactly what it was. And here's the kicker. It's not just one sound anymore. It's two. Like two heartbeats. One slow and steady, and one that sounds exactly like mine. So yeah, judge me if you want, but I'm telling you this now. If you ever move into a house and find a door in the basement that shouldn't be there, leave it the hell alone. Because I didn't. And now, I don't think I'll ever be able to leave. You ever have one of those dreams that just feels real? Like so real that when you wake up, you're sitting there for a minute, trying to figure out if you're still asleep? Yeah, that's how it started for me. It was a few months ago, and I was just going about my normal day. Work was stressful, sure. I had this deadline coming up, and Marissa, my fiancée, well, let's just say things were tense there too. But nothing crazy, right? Just your average midlife stuff. Then, that night, I had this dream. I'm in this parking garage, one of those dingy concrete places with dim lights that flicker just enough to make you uncomfortable. I don't even know what I'm doing there. Don't remember parking my car, don't remember walking in. But I'm there, and I'm alone. It's dead quiet, except for the echo of my footsteps. You ever notice how in dreams some things just stick out? Like, the way my shoes clicked against the floor was louder than it should have been, like it was the only sound in the world. I couldn't hear anything else, not even my own breathing. Weird, right? So, I'm walking through this garage, heading toward my car, or at least what I think is my car. I couldn't really see it clearly, it was just this blurry shape in the distance. But I knew I was going there, because, well, it's a dream. That's how dreams work. Then I hear it. Footsteps, not mine. No, these were coming from somewhere behind me. It wasn't fast or loud, just steady. Like someone was casually following me, not in a rush, just enough to let me know they were there. I turn around, and of course there's nothing. Just the empty garage behind me, stretching out into the dark. But the footsteps? Yeah, they didn't stop. They kept coming. I pick up the pace. That awkward speed walking thing people do when they don't want to look freaked out, but are definitely freaked out. I'm almost at the car now, and I swear I can see someone, just a shadow maybe. But I don't stop to check. I don't turn around again. Why would I? I get to the car, fumble with my keys, and boom, I wake up, just like that. Cold sweat, sitting up in bed, heart pounding. You know the drill. Marissa was asleep next to me, and for a second I almost woke her up to tell her about the dream. But then I felt ridiculous. It was just a nightmare, right? No big deal. So I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake it off. I told myself it was just a dream, nothing more. But there was this weird feeling that stuck with me, like something was off, like I'd forgotten something important. But whatever, I didn't think about it too much the next day. Went to work, came home, normal routine. Then it happened again the next night. Same parking garage, same footsteps, same shadowy figure lurking behind me. Only this time the car was a little further away, and I could feel the footsteps getting closer. You ever have that feeling in a dream, where you know something's coming for you, but you can't see it? Yeah, that's what this was like. I woke up in the same panic, but this time I couldn't shake it. It felt too real. Like the dream was trying to tell me something, warn me maybe. but I still didn't say anything. Didn't even mention it to Marissa. Looking back now, I probably should have, because that was just the beginning, and I had no idea how bad it was going to get. So, after that second dream, I started to notice things, small things at first. You know how when you're watching a movie for the second time and suddenly you pick up on details you missed the first time around? That's kind of what it felt like. I'm walking to my car after work one evening, in this dimly lit parking garage near the office. Pretty normal for me, nothing strange about that. But as I'm heading to the car, it hits me. It's the same damn garage from the dream. Same cold concrete, same flickering lights, same eerie silence. For a split second, I'm standing there thinking, wait, have I been here before? Not in real life, but in the dream? And then, out of nowhere, I hear it, the footsteps. Exactly like in the dream, slow, deliberate, like someone's just casually following me from a distance. But when I turn around, nothing. Just an empty lot behind me as far as I can see. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know it's probably just my mind messing with me, right? I had this weird dream, and now my brain's connecting dots that aren't really there. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I don't even know why, but I found myself walking faster, like somehow that would change anything. I make it to my car, start it up, and I'm out of there. But that whole drive home, I can't stop thinking about it. The dream, the footsteps, the weird deja vu. It's like my brain's caught in a loop. And part of me is thinking, okay, Eli, you're losing it. You're working too much. You're stressed. Go home, have a beer, and chill the hell out. That's what I did. But man, that night, the dream came back again. Only this time, things were different. I'm in the same garage, but the car, it's further away, like way further. And the footsteps, they're louder, closer. I can feel this presence behind me, like whoever or whatever was following me before is right on my tail now. I didn't dare turn around, not this time. I'm practically running to the car, but it feels like I'm stuck in molasses, Like I'm trying to move, but I'm not getting anywhere. By the time I reach the car, I hear something. A voice, maybe? Or just breathing. And just like that, I wake up again. I sat up in bed, breathing heavy, and that same cold feeling washed over me. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It couldn't be. 3 nights in a row? The same damn place? The same chase? No, something was wrong. I told Marissa the next morning. I mean, I had to at that point. But she looked at me like I was crazy, which I kinda expected. She just smiled and said, "You've been working too hard, babe. You're just stressed. Take a day off. Go for a run. Clear your head." Yeah, easier said than done, right? Still, I tried to brush it off. Told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was right. Maybe I just needed to relax. But of course, it wasn't that simple. Because later that day, something happened that, well, let's just say it shook me up more than I'd like to admit. I was heading out to grab lunch, and I swear to you, I heard those footsteps again. Not in the dream, not in my head, but right there, in the middle of the street, broad daylight, real as anything. I turned around so fast I almost tripped over myself. But again, there was no one there. And that's when I started to realize, maybe the dream wasn't just a dream. Maybe it was more like a warning. A warning of what, though? I had no idea. All I knew was that every time I tried to push it aside, it kept coming back. The dreams were getting worse. The footsteps were getting closer. And I was starting to lose my grip on what was real and what wasn't. But the worst part? I couldn't stop it. By the time the third dream hit, I knew something was really off. I tried to play it cool during the day, but every night that damn garage, the footsteps, and the feeling of being hunted got more intense. I started obsessing over it. Not gonna lie, it was all I could think about. I even told Dan about it. You remember Dan, right? We went to college together and now he's a psychiatrist or some kind of mental health expert, always trying to be the rational one. Anyway, I figured if anyone could explain this mess, it'd be him. So I called him up and we grabbed a beer. I laid it all out, the dreams, the footsteps, how everything felt too real to just be a coincidence. And of course he gave me the whole, well, Eli, dreams are just your subconscious working through stress. You probably have some unresolved anxieties, speech. Classic therapist talk. But here's the thing, this didn't feel like stress. This felt like fate, like something was coming for me, no matter what I did. Dan didn't get that. He thought I was spiraling because of work pressure or my rocky relationship with Marissa, and maybe part of me wanted to believe that too. I mean, who wants to admit they're being hunted by a dream? Still, I tried to do what Dan suggested. He gave me this little notebook and told me to write down my dreams every morning, get them on paper so they wouldn't fester in my mind all day. So I started journaling, trying to track the patterns, but that only made it worse. Every dream was the same, but each time the car got farther away and the footsteps got louder. And the shadowy figure behind me? It wasn't just a blur anymore. It was me. Yeah, you heard me right. It was me, or some twisted version of myself, chasing me through that parking garage. That's when I lost it. I mean, how do you deal with that? It was like every time I tried to get closer to figuring it out, the dream got ahead of me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I decided to leave town. Yup, I figured if I wasn't here, if I wasn't near that garage or that shadow version of me, maybe I could escape whatever this was. I know it sounds insane, but at that point, everything felt insane. I didn't tell Marissa. I just packed a bag, left a note, and drove out to this cabin I remembered from when I was a kid. It was a few hours away, deep in the woods, with no one around for miles. I figured I'd lay low for a few days, clear my head, and hopefully the dreams would stop. The first night there, I slept like a rock. No nightmares, no footsteps, just silence. I woke up thinking maybe I'd beaten it, maybe I'd outrun whatever was coming for me. And for a minute, I felt relieved, like I'd actually outsmarted this thing. But of course, it didn't last. The second night, it all came back. Only this time, I wasn't in the parking garage. I was at the cabin. In the dream, I'm standing outside, looking at the trees swaying in the wind, and I hear the footsteps again. Except now, they're crunching leaves, moving faster, coming straight toward me. I turn around, and there it is, my own shadow, my own face, staring me down. It's getting closer, and I can't move. I'm stuck, like I'm watching myself die from the outside. And then, just as it reaches me, I wake up. But here's the thing. When I woke up, I swear I heard the footsteps outside the cabin. For a good 10 minutes, I just lay there, listening. There was nothing, just rain tapping against the window, trees rustling in the wind. Part of me wanted to check outside, see if there was anything there, but the smarter part of me stayed put. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could outrun anymore. It was here, and it wasn't going away. The next morning, I packed up and left the cabin. There was no point staying there. If the dreams followed me out into the middle of nowhere, what was the point of hiding? But the weirdest thing? When I got in the car to leave, I glanced at the back seat, and for a split second, I saw it. My own reflection, grinning back at me. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I didn't tell anyone I was back. Didn't call Marissa, didn't text Dan. Honestly, I just needed to figure out what the hell was happening without everyone in my ear telling me I was losing it. I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't about to have a debate over whether or not I was cracking up. So I just slipped back into town, kept my head down, and tried to pretend I wasn't in the middle of some nightmare loop. The first day back was fine. I mean, no weird dreams, no footsteps following me around. Just a normal day, which, believe it or not, made me feel worse. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but nothing happened. And that should have been a good thing, right? But no, it wasn't. It felt more like the calm before the storm. Like the dream was waiting for me to let my guard down. Sure enough, that night, it hit me harder than ever. I'm back in the garage, but now everything's in slow motion. I'm walking toward my car, but it's like I'm moving through thick syrup. And the footsteps? They're not slow anymore. They're pounding, like they're sprinting toward me, faster than ever. I turn around, and there it is again. Me, the shadow version, charging at me full force. It's got my face, but it's twisted, grinning in this way that makes my stomach drop. I try to run, but I can't. I'm stuck in place, watching as this thing gets closer, and then, just as it reaches me, I wake up. But this time, I'm not in bed. I'm in my car. In the parking garage. The parking garage. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but no, this was real. I was sitting in my car, staring at the dim lights of the garage, and I had no idea how I got there. I don't even remember leaving the house. For a few minutes, I just sat there, trying to piece it together. Maybe I'd sleepwalked? Maybe I'd driven there in some kind of trance? I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. All I knew was I had to get the hell out of there. So I started the car, slammed it into reverse, and sped out of that garage like my life depended on it. And part of me thought maybe it did. But as I was driving home, something hit me. This wasn't random. The dream, the garage, the footsteps, all of it, it was pulling me back to the same place, over and over. And no matter what I did, no matter how far I ran, it was always going to lead me right back here. So that's when I made the decision. I was done running. If this thing wanted to come for me, I was going to face it. Whatever it was, some weird psychic vision, a ghost, my own subconscious, whatever, I was going to end it. The next day I went back to the garage. Yeah, I know, probably not the smartest move, but I wasn't exactly thinking straight at this point. I had this, I don't know, drive to get back there. It was like the only way to stop the dreams was to walk right into them. So I parked my car outside and walked in, just like I had in the dream. Same dim lights, same echo of my footsteps, same eerie feeling creeping over me. But this time, I wasn't running. I was ready. At least I thought I was. As I walked toward where my car should have been in the dream, I heard it again. The footsteps. Only they weren't behind me anymore. They were in front of me. And when I looked up, there I was. My reflection. Only it wasn't in a mirror. It was standing right there, grinning at me like it had all the power in the world, like it knew something I didn't. And that's when it hit me. This thing wasn't chasing me. It wasn't some outside force trying to kill me. It was me, my own fear, my own paranoia, driving me into this loop. I was the one pulling myself back to the garage, every time. I was the one running from something that didn't even exist. The dream wasn't a warning, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I tried to escape it, the more I made it real. And standing there face to face with myself, I realized I'd been running from nothing this whole time. But here's the kicker. Knowing that didn't change a damn thing. Because as soon as I took a step toward my reflection, it lunged at me. And I woke up again, in the exact same place. So there I was, sitting in my car again, in the same damn parking garage, like it was some twisted version of Groundhog Day. I couldn't tell if I was awake or still dreaming, and at that point, it didn't even matter. It was all blending together. Reality, dreams, whatever this thing was, it had me. I was stuck. And the worst part, I knew it. I'd gone back and forth so many times, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't, that I didn't care anymore. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted out. But I knew there was only one way for this to end. I wasn't running anymore. I'd tried that, and it only brought me right back here. So if I couldn't escape it, I figured I'd meet it head on, face whatever this thing was. I got out of the car and walked toward the same spot in the garage where the dreams always ended. My footsteps echoed, just like they always did, and I could hear it behind me. The other footsteps. My footsteps. But I didn't turn around this time. I didn't need to. I already knew what was there. I walked up to where my car should have been in the dream, but this time it wasn't blurry. It was clear as day, sitting right there in front of me, like it had been waiting for me all along. And standing next to it? Yeah, you guessed it. Me. That twisted version of myself, with that same creepy grin plastered on its face. But here's the thing, it didn't move this time. It just stood there, watching me. Like it was waiting for me to do something. And that's when I realized I was never going to beat this thing. I couldn't fight it, couldn't run from it. It wasn't some outside force coming for me. It was me. My own fear, my own obsession with the dream. And the more I tried to stop it, the more I brought it to life. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked right up to it, stared myself in the eyes, and said, "I'm done. Do whatever you're going to do." And for a second, nothing happened. Then slowly, that twisted version of me reached out, placed a hand on my shoulder, and leaned in close. It whispered something, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "You can't escape what's already inside you," it said. And then everything went dark. When I came to, I was back in my car, outside the garage. Rain was coming down hard, beating against the windshield, and I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Had I beaten it? Had I finally broken the loop? I didn't know, but something felt different. Like the weight I'd been carrying for weeks had lifted. I drove home that night, went straight to bed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have the dream. No footsteps, no shadowy figure, nothing. Just sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling like maybe I'd finally outrun it. Maybe facing it down had worked. Maybe I was free. But part of me knew that wasn't true. Not really. Because as I was getting dressed for work, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And for just a split second, I swear, I saw that same twisted grin staring back at me. I'm not sure it'll ever be gone. I'm not sure I can ever be free of it. Because you can't really escape what's already inside you, can you? All I know is, since that day I haven't had the dream again. But every now and then, when I'm walking through a quiet parking lot, or I hear footsteps in an empty room, I wonder, how close is it? And is it still waiting for me? Sarah and I had just gotten married, and life was already starting to feel, I don't know, overwhelming? You know how it is. Work piles up, you barely have time for yourself, and then you're supposed to make time for your partner too. Not that I didn't love Sarah, I do, but it felt like we were already more like roommates than newlyweds. Which, yeah, maybe that should have been a red flag. So we thought, let's fix it, let's get away. Just the two of us. No distractions, no deadlines, just fresh air, nature, and, I don't know, maybe some sort of deep reconnection. We'd found this cabin super isolated, and that was the appeal. Middle of nowhere, with a view of the lake and the kind of silence you can't get in the city. It sounded perfect, at the time at least. We got there on a Friday evening, just before it started raining. Typical, right? The sky was all gloomy, like something out of a bad horror movie. But honestly, we didn't care. We had a whole weekend planned out. Hiking, fishing, maybe even some, romantic stuff. The cabin itself was small, cozy, I guess people would call it. Wooden everything, old school fireplace, and it smelled like pine and damp leaves, which wasn't the worst thing. It had this rustic charm, but not in a Pinterest way. More like it probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. Still, I figured that's what you get when you're paying for seclusion. That first night was fine. We made dinner. Well, I burnt the chicken, and Sarah tried not to laugh at me. Typical. We opened a bottle of wine, and I don't even remember what we talked about. Probably just stuff about how we needed this break. How nice it was to unplug. I mean, we were practically on another planet, as far as cell service was concerned, which, again, felt like a feature, not a bug. By the time we got into bed, the rain was really coming down. Like that heavy, steady kind of rain that almost makes you sleepy just listening to it. Sarah fell asleep first, which wasn't a surprise. And I remember just lying there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how things had gotten so, I don't know, distant between us. Part of me thought this was the answer. This weekend. This cabin. I should have known better. The next morning I went to make coffee. Typical morning routine, right? Except when I went to open the front door to get some fresh air, there it was. A note. Just a plain piece of paper, folded in half, sitting right there on the doorstep. I figured it was from the cabin owners, like some weird check-in thing, Maybe a list of house rules or something. But when I opened it, that's when things got weird. The note said, "Sarah never told you what really happened that night in college, did she?" I stood there, reading it over again, like maybe I'd misunderstood. But nope, that's what it said, plain as day. And the thing is, it was written in this old-school cursive handwriting, like the kind your grandmother would use, not something you'd expect from a cabin rental place. At first, I kind of laughed it off. I mean, what else are you supposed to do when something like that happens? I figured it was some prank. Maybe the last people who stayed here left it behind to mess with us. I shoved it in my pocket and didn't tell Sarah about it. Probably should have, though. Later that day, we went on this long hike. The rain had stopped, but everything was still soaked. We didn't talk about much, just the usual. What we should do for dinner. If we should try fishing tomorrow. The kind of empty, casual conversation you have when you're pretending things are fine. But I kept thinking about that note. Like, what the hell was it talking about? Was it just some random joke, or was it something more? I mean, Sarah and I never really talked much about her college years. not in detail, anyway. So, yeah, part of me wondered if there was something there, something I didn't know. But I kept it to myself. I mean, it was probably nothing, right? That's what I told myself, anyway. The next morning, things got a little, well, weird. I mean, we were still in that vacation mode mindset, you know? Not thinking too hard about anything, just enjoying the time off. But when I woke up and saw Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at something in her hands, I knew right away that something wasn't right. I got out of bed, still half asleep, and asked her what was up. She didn't answer me at first, just sat there, completely still. Finally, she handed me another note. This time it wasn't addressed to me. It was for her. It said, "Ben hasn't told you everything about that business trip last year, has he?" I laughed, honestly. I mean, what else could I do? We were both getting these ridiculous notes now. It felt like some dumb prank that just kept going. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She had this look on her face like she was piecing something together, and not in a good way. "Sarah, come on," I said. "You don't seriously think this means anything, do you?" But she didn't answer. She just kept staring at the note, like it was burning a hole in the table. Then, out of nowhere, she asks, "Were you really on that business trip?" I was kind of thrown by the question. Yeah, I'd gone on a business trip the year before, a short one, just a weekend thing, but I never thought it was a big deal. Apparently, she had. I don't know, something about the way she asked made me defensive. I probably got more defensive than I should have, but I just didn't like where the conversation was heading. "Of course I was on the trip, Sarah. What, you think I've been lying to you?" She didn't say anything, just stared at me, like she was waiting for me to slip up. It pissed me off, honestly. It's just some stupid prank, okay? Somebody left us these notes to mess with us, probably kids or something. You really think I'd lie to you about something like that? But she wasn't buying it. I could see the doubt in her eyes, like a little crack that just kept getting bigger the more I tried to explain. She folded the note and set it aside, but I knew things weren't right. Something had shifted between us, like a line had been crossed, even though neither of us knew how or why. That day was tense, to say the least. We didn't talk much, just walked around the cabin, tried to keep busy. But every time I caught her looking at me, it was like she was waiting for me to come clean about something I wasn't even guilty of. And the worst part? I started wondering if she was hiding something too. I mean, why was the first note about her? What did it mean? What really happened that night in college? What did happen? We were both too stubborn to talk about it, though. Instead, we kept pretending everything was fine, even though it wasn't. By the time evening rolled around, the rain had picked up again, and the cabin felt off. That night, I found another note, this time under my pillow. It was short, just a few words, but it hit harder than the first two. Ben never wanted kids. Now, to be clear, I didn't think I'd ever said that, not out loud anyway. Sure, I'd had my doubts, like any normal person, but Sarah and I hadn't even started seriously talking about kids yet. How the hell would anyone know what I'd been thinking? I stared at that note for a long time, longer than I probably should have. And I'm not proud of this, but part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, Sarah had written it. Maybe this was her way of testing me, or getting back at me for something. I mean, who else could it have been, right? I didn't say anything to her about it, though. I figured that would just make things worse. I shoved the note into my pocket and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. It stuck with me, nagging at the back of my mind all night. We barely spoke the rest of the evening, just sat there in the dim light of the fireplace, pretending to read or watch the rain pour down outside. But neither of us was really there anymore. Not really. We were both lost in our own heads, thinking about the notes, about what they meant. And the thing is, I started second-guessing everything. Was Sarah hiding something from me? Had I missed some sign, some clue that things weren't as perfect as I thought? I didn't know what to believe anymore. By the time we went to bed, the cabin didn't feel so cozy anymore. It felt like a trap, and both of us were too afraid to admit it. The next morning, another note. The next morning, the rain was still coming down, steady and relentless. I remember thinking we couldn't even leave if we wanted to, not in that weather. But it didn't really matter, because another note was waiting for us. This one was right on the kitchen counter, as if whoever or whatever had left it knew exactly where we'd see it first thing. It was short again, simple, and it hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah was in love with someone else when she agreed to marry you. I stood there, reading it over and over, like it might change if I stared at it long enough. But it didn't. The words stayed the same, and I felt this tightness in my chest, but not the kind you get from fear or panic, more like frustration. Frustration because, deep down, I knew it wasn't impossible. I mean, Sarah and I had a whirlwind kind of romance, you know? One minute we were dating, the next we were planning a wedding, and I never really questioned it because why would I? But this note, it made me question everything. Sarah walked into the kitchen while I was still holding it, and I swear I didn't even want to show her. Part of me wanted to tear it up and pretend I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't. So I handed it to her, and she just stared at it. She didn't say anything for what felt like forever. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "Is this really happening? Are we seriously getting notes from someone who's trying to mess with our marriage?" I didn't know how to respond to that. I mean, what do you say? Yeah, babe, someone out there knows way too much about us and is clearly enjoying watching us squirm? So I just nodded. But the look on her face, that told me everything I needed to know. The note had hit her just as hard as it had hit me. And I started to wonder. Maybe there was something she hadn't told me. Is it true? I asked. I tried to keep my voice steady, but let's be honest, it wasn't. She looked at me like I'd just slapped her. Are you serious, Ben? You're really gonna ask me that? Can you blame me? I shot back. I didn't mean to sound so harsh, but by that point, all the doubt, all the tension from the past couple of days, it was bubbling up and I couldn't hold it back anymore. First I get a note about you keeping secrets, and now this? You're telling me none of this is true? She set the note down, and for a second, I thought she was going to walk out of the cabin right then and there. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I don't know where these notes are coming from, but I swear to you, I didn't marry you as some kind of second choice. I love you, okay? I don't know what kind of game this is, but it's not going to work." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the thing is, once doubt sets in, it's like a crack in glass. It just spreads, and before you know it, the whole thing's shattered. And I think she knew it too, because the rest of the day, we barely spoke. We were both tiptoeing around each other, afraid to say or do the wrong thing. It felt like we were waiting for the next bomb to drop. And it did. That night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling again. Rain tapping against the window. When I heard Sarah get up, I didn't think much of it at first, figured maybe she was just getting water or something. But then I heard her talking, like she was having a conversation, except I couldn't hear anyone else. I got up, walked out into the living room, and there she was, standing in the middle of the room, holding another note. But this time she wasn't just reading it, she was arguing with it, like out loud. "I don't care," she was saying, her voice all low and shaky. "It's not true. None of it's true." I walked up to her slowly, trying not to startle her, because the last thing I needed was for her to think I was sneaking up on her. "Sarah?" I said quietly. "What's going on?" She turned around and she looked lost. That's the only way I can describe it. Lost. She handed me the note, and when I read it, I felt that same tightness again. Ben lied to you about more than just the business trip. It was like these notes were specifically designed to drive us insane. And they were working. We spent the next couple of hours pacing the cabin, checking every door, every window, looking for any sign of who was doing this. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone sneaking around. Just us, and these goddamn notes. By the time we crawled back into bed, I could tell we were both thinking the same thing, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. What if the other person was writing the notes? I mean, it made sense, right? Who else could possibly know these kinds of things? Who else had access to our most private thoughts, our deepest fears? Part of me wanted to believe it was just Sarah, that she was the one behind it all. But then again, maybe she was thinking the same thing about me. We lay there in silence, the rain tapping against the window, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, we woke up to more rain. It hadn't let up since we got here, and now it felt less like some peaceful backdrop and more like a weight pressing down on us. By this point, I wasn't even sure what day it was anymore. Everything was just blurred together. But there was one thing I knew for certain. There was another note waiting for us. It was sitting right there on the kitchen table, like it had just magically appeared overnight. I didn't even bother to ask how. I mean, at this point, nothing really surprised me anymore. Sarah found it first. She picked it up, and I could see her hands tighten around the edges as she read it. She didn't say anything, just handed it over to me, like she was done with it, like the note had somehow drained her of whatever energy she had left. I took it, already bracing for whatever was written inside. But this one was worse. It said, "You can't leave until the truth comes out." That's when something shifted for me. Up until that point, I'd been holding on to this small hope that maybe this was all just some elaborate prank, some messed up game that would end when we left the cabin. But this note, this was different. It wasn't about me or Sarah. It was about us, about whatever was happening to us. "We need to get out of here," I said, more to myself than to her. I could feel it building, this need to escape, like something terrible was waiting for us if we stayed. "We should have left days ago." Sarah nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "And go where, Ben? The road's flooded. Our car's dead. We're stuck here until the rain stops." She was right. The storm had made sure of that. And it wasn't like we could hike out in this weather. But the idea of staying in that cabin another day, it made my skin crawl. "I don't care," I said. "We can walk, or at least try. I'm not sitting around waiting for the next note like some kind of sitting duck." But before I could finish, there was a loud thud from the front door. Sarah and I froze, staring at each other for a second, waiting. But nothing followed. Just silence and the steady drumming of rain. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, moving toward the door slowly, feeling like maybe this was the moment. The moment when we finally saw who was doing this to us. I grabbed the handle, yanked the door open, and nothing. No one was there. Just more rain, more gray sky, and the thick, soggy trees swaying in the wind. But when I looked down, I saw it. Another note. This one pinned to the door with a rusty old nail. I pulled it off, my heart pounding, and unfolded it with shaking hands. The words were scrawled in that same old-fashioned cursive. "Don't forget the basement." Now here's the thing. Up until that point, I didn't even know the cabin had a basement. We hadn't seen a door or a hatch anywhere, and trust me, we'd searched every inch of that place. But the note had come from somewhere. Someone knew something we didn't. Sarah was right behind me, reading over my shoulder. "What basement?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I said, turning around and looking at the floor like the answer was going to magically appear. "But I guess we're about to find out." We spent the next hour tearing the place apart, pulling up rugs, moving furniture, searching for anything that looked like a trapdoor. And finally, after pushing the old wooden dresser in the bedroom aside, there it was, a small square hatch, tucked away like a secret. We stared at it for a long time. Neither of us really wanted to open it, but we didn't have much of a choice, did we? "I'll go first," I said, trying to sound brave, but feeling anything but. I pulled the hatch open, and this stale, musty smell hit me like a brick. It was dark down there. No lights, just a set of rickety wooden stairs that led into pitch-black nothingness. "Then maybe we should just... I don't know." "Wait," Sarah said, but I knew waiting wasn't an option anymore. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this wasn't going to stop. Not until we figured out what they wanted. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, clicked it on, and slowly started down the stairs. Sarah followed close behind, her footsteps barely making a sound on the old wood. The basement was small, cramped, more like a crawl space than an actual room. The floor was cold, hard dirt, and there was this thick layer of dust over everything. In the far corner, there was an old wooden chest, half buried in the dirt. That was it. Nothing else. Just this chest. We walked over to it, and the second I touched it, I knew. I knew this was what the notes had been leading us to. "Ben, don't," Sarah whispered. But it was too late. I had to know. I had to see what was inside. I pried the lid open, and there, inside, was something I'll never forget. Notes. Hundreds of them. all crumpled and yellowed with age like they'd been sitting there for decades. And they weren't just random notes either. They were all addressed to different people, different couples. The names were unfamiliar, but the words were the same. The secrets, the accusations, it was like we weren't the first ones this had happened to. "We have to leave," I said, backing away from the chest. "We have to go right now." But just as I turned to go back up the stairs, I saw it. Another note, sitting on the bottom step. It read, "The truth will set you free, or destroy you." We stood there, staring at that last note like it was some kind of death sentence. The air in the basement felt heavier, colder, like even the walls were closing in on us. Sarah didn't say anything at first. She just kept looking back at that chest full of old notes, like she was trying to make sense of how deep this thing went. I could tell she was scared. Hell, I was too. But more than that, I was done. Done with the games, done with the notes, done with whatever this cabin was trying to do to us. "We're leaving. Now," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. I grabbed Sarah's hand and headed up the stairs. She didn't argue. There wasn't any point. When we got back upstairs, we didn't waste any time. I started grabbing our stuff, clothes, bags, anything we could carry. I didn't care that it was still pouring outside or that the road was probably flooded. I didn't care that we didn't have a working car. All I cared about was getting the hell out of that cabin before whatever was happening escalated even further. But as I was packing, Sarah just stood there, watching me with this strange look on her face. I could see she was holding something back, something big. And before I could stop myself, I said, "What is it? You know something, don't you?" She didn't answer right away. She just shook her head, like she was trying to fight off whatever thoughts were spinning in her mind. But then she finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Ben, I don't think we can leave. Not until we tell each other the truth." I felt this surge of frustration. "What truth, Sarah? I've told you everything. This is just some kind of twisted joke, and I'm not sticking around to find out who's behind it. I don't care anymore." She stepped closer, her eyes locked on mine, and I could see that something in her had shifted. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about what we know. It's about what we're hiding from each other." "What are you talking about?" I asked, suddenly feeling like maybe there was something she wasn't telling me. And that's when she said it. "The night before we got engaged, I saw him, the guy I loved before you." She paused, clearly struggling with the words. "He wanted me back. He told me everything I wanted to hear, and for a second, I almost said yes. But I didn't. I chose you." I didn't know how to react. Part of me was angry. Angry that she'd never told me this before. Angry that it had taken a bunch of creepy notes to bring it out. But part of me was relieved. Like maybe this was the thing we needed to confront, the thing the cabin wanted us to face. But then I realized something. The notes weren't just about her. They'd been about me too. And deep down, I knew I had my own confession to make. I took a deep breath. Last year, that business trip. It wasn't just a trip. I was thinking about leaving. I told myself I was going to use those few days to figure it out. To figure out if I wanted to come back. But by the time I got on the plane home, I knew I wasn't ready to give up on us. We stood there, the words hanging in the air between us like some unspoken weight finally being lifted. For the first time in days, I felt like we might actually get through this. Like maybe the notes had served their purpose, forcing us to be honest in a way we hadn't been before. But then, the door slammed shut. We both spun around, eyes wide, but there was no one there. No wind, no draft, nothing that should have made the door move on its own. And when I walked over to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was locked. From the outside. That's when the panic really started to set in. I yanked at the door, but it wouldn't give. Sarah was behind me, her breathing shallow, her voice shaking as she asked, "What's happening, Ben?" I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that we were trapped. The cabin wasn't going to let us leave. Not yet. Then, from behind us, another note. It wasn't folded up like the others. This one was tacked to the wall, right next to the fireplace. I don't know how long it had been there, or how we hadn't noticed it before. But there it was, waiting for us. "The truth will set you free, but you haven't told it all." I turned to Sarah, and I could see the fear in her eyes. But more than that, I could see the doubt. She wasn't sure I had told her everything, and I wasn't sure she had either. "We've told the truth," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I wasn't feeling calm at all. "We've told everything." But as I said it, I felt this creeping thought at the back of my mind. What if I hadn't? What if there was still something left unsaid? And as I stood there, staring at that note, I realized there was one more thing. One thing I hadn't admitted. Not to her, not to myself. I turned to Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing you, more than anything, and I think that's why I've been holding back. That's why I didn't tell you about the trip, or the doubts I've had." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes softening, like she understood. "Ben, I've been scared too." And just like that, the door unlocked. We both stood there, frozen for a second, not sure if we should believe it. But when I turned the handle, it swung open easily. The rain had finally stopped, the air outside fresh and cool. Without a word, we grabbed our bags, hurried outside, and didn't look back. As we walked away from that cabin, I could feel it, the weight lifting, like we'd passed some kind of test. But even as we drove away, that last note kept echoing in my head. "The truth will set you free." And to this day I wonder, had we told the whole truth? Or had the cabin just let us believe we had? So this all started when I went back home to Maplewood after my mom passed. I hadn't been back there in, God, it must have been at least 20 years, maybe more. I was one of those people who bolted the second I turned 18, swore I'd never come back. You know the type. Anyway, when my mom died, there wasn't anyone else left to clean out the house, so it fell on me. I remember pulling up to the old place, and man, let me tell you, it was a real trip. The house was just how I left it, right down to the weird chipped mailbox that leaned slightly to the left, as if it was trying to take a nap. But everything felt smaller than I remembered. I guess time does that. Or maybe it was just that it was dusk, and the rain had started coming down by then, making the whole street feel like it was sagging under the weight of the water. Anyway, I wasn't exactly in a hurry to get inside. I stood there in the driveway for a while, just listening to the rain hitting the car roof and trying to psych myself up. It was one of those moments where you're like, do I really want to go through all of this? But of course I had to. The house wasn't going to clean itself out. So I finally went in. The house smelled like old wood and mothballs, like it had been frozen in time. You know that smell, kind of like it's been holding its breath, waiting for someone to come back. I walked through the living room and nothing had changed. Same floral couch, same musty curtains. I half expected my mom to come around the corner, scolding me for not wiping my feet. Weird, right? But that's what grief does, I guess. So I started with the attic because it's always the worst part of any house. Dusty, cluttered, full of stuff you'd rather just leave there. The rain was really coming down by then, pounding on the roof, so it kind of made everything feel heavier, like the whole house was drowning. I climbed the creaky stairs, holding on to the railing that was still sticky with old varnish, and pushed open the attic door. It was just as awful as I remembered. Boxes stacked on boxes, some covered in old sheets, like ghost furniture. I started digging through stuff, trying to get a handle on what to keep, what to toss, what to sell. And that's when I found Charlie. At first, I didn't even recognize him. He was buried in a box under some old blankets, his little glass eyes staring up at me. I pulled him out, and the memories hit me hard. I hadn't seen that toy in years, decades even. Charlie the monkey, this old stuffed monkey with cymbals. He was one of those wind-up toys you'd see in an old movie. You'd twist the key, and he'd bang his little cymbals together. I don't know why I kept him all these years. Maybe because he was mine, not Ellie's, not anyone else's. The weird thing was, I didn't remember him being so creepy when I was a kid, but standing there, in that dim attic, holding this old beat-up monkey, it was like he was watching me. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but I swear, his eyes followed me as I moved around the room. Part of me thought about just throwing him in the junk pile and calling it a day, but something made me hold on to him. Maybe it was the memories. Maybe it was just the weird nostalgia that hits when you go through your childhood stuff. I took Charlie downstairs and stuck him on the table while I finished up for the day. The rain was coming down even harder by then, the kind that makes the gutters overflow and turns the street into a river. It got dark quick, and I didn't feel like driving back to the hotel in that mess, so I decided to crash at the house. Plus, I figured it'd be easier to just keep working the next morning if I stayed. Not exactly a fun night, but whatever. I'll tell you this though, I should have left. That night, I was lying in bed, just trying to ignore the sound of the rain pounding on the roof and dripping down the windows, when I heard this faint sound. At first, I thought it was just the rain or the wind pushing the old house around. You know how old houses creak and groan like they're alive, especially when the weather's bad? But this was different. It was this soft, metallic clanging, like cymbals. It was so faint, I almost convinced myself I was hearing things, but it kept going, and then it hit me. Charlie. I rolled over and tried to ignore it, thinking, there's no way that's coming from him. He's a wind-up toy. No batteries, no nothing. But the sound kept going. I couldn't shake it, and it was getting louder. Or maybe I was just getting more focused on it. Either way, I knew I wasn't imagining things by then. So I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went downstairs to the kitchen, where I'd left Charlie. The second I turned the corner, the clanging stopped. I flicked on the light, and there he was, sitting in the exact spot I'd left him. His cymbals were still and silent, but I swear on my life, those little eyes were looking right at me, like he knew I was there. I stood there for a second, staring at him like an idiot, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. The house was dead quiet, except for the rain outside. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, you know? Oh great, Tom, you're hearing things from a toy monkey. What are you, 10? But then I noticed something. Scratched into the table right in front of Charlie. It was shallow, like someone had used a key or something sharp. Just one word, fire. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that word. Long enough to start convincing myself that I must have scratched it by accident earlier while I was moving stuff around. Yeah, that had to be it. The toy wasn't real. It wasn't alive. It couldn't do anything. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And I wasn't about to stay up all night in a house with a toy that might be messing with me. So I grabbed Charlie, threw him in a box, and shoved him in the closet. That should have been the end of it, right? Well, it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up early. The rain was still coming down, though lighter, like the storm had decided to take a breather. I grabbed some coffee from the old pot my mom used to have, one of those old school ones that takes forever to brew, and sat at the kitchen table. For a second, everything felt normal, like maybe I'd just imagined the whole thing with Charlie. Maybe I was just tired, stressed out, still dealing with grief. You start telling yourself that when things don't make sense, you know? But then I saw the scratches again. Fire. Carved right into the wood of the table, exactly where Charlie had been sitting the night before. I ran my hand over it, trying to feel if it was deep, like maybe I could have done it accidentally when I was moving boxes. Nope. It was intentional, precise, like someone wanted me to see it. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought crossed my mind. Was this toy, was Charlie, trying to tell me something? I laughed at myself, sitting there in the dim kitchen with the rain pattering outside, thinking a toy could somehow predict the future. Yeah, right? I'd been back in town for what, a day? Already losing my mind. That's what I told myself as I grabbed my coat, ready to get the hell out of the house and start cleaning up the mess Mom had left behind in her life and in mine. Then, on my way to the door, I heard sirens. At first, I figured they were probably just regular emergency calls. You hear sirens in the city all the time. You don't even think about them after a while. But then I saw the flashing lights bouncing off the rain-soaked windows of the front room. Red, flickering, fast, like something bad had happened. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out onto the porch. The street was wet and shiny, reflecting the lights of a fire truck parked a few blocks down. I could see smoke billowing up into the gray morning sky, rising slowly through the misty rain. It was coming from Maplewood Orphanage, the one just down the road. I felt this weird jolt in my gut. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Great, here comes the part where he starts putting two and two together. Trust me. I didn't want to. I stood there on the porch, staring at the smoke and trying to tell myself it was just a coincidence. The word fire on the table? Just a freaky accident. Maybe something I did while I was distracted. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I threw on my jacket, shoved my keys in my pocket, and walked down the street, feeling the cold rain soak through my shoes. When I got closer, I saw a crowd gathered near the orphanage. The firemen were rushing in and out of the place, hoses blasting water, smoke still pouring out of the windows. The flames were under control by then, but the place was trashed. And I could hear people talking, whispering, like they were scared to say it too loud. Kids were inside when it started, one woman said, her umbrella barely keeping her dry. Some of them didn't make it out. I stopped in my tracks, like I'd hit a wall. Some of them didn't make it out. That's when the full weight of it hit me. I wasn't imagining this. Charlie wasn't just some old toy. He knew. Somehow he knew, and he tried to warn me. That word on the table, fire, it wasn't just random. He'd been telling me about this fire, the one that was happening right now. I stood there in the rain, not knowing whether to scream or run. The smoke was still thick in the air, mixing with the drizzle, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. What the hell was I supposed to do with this information? I couldn't exactly go up to the firemen and tell them my old toy had predicted the fire. It'd sound insane, but part of me knew I couldn't ignore it either. I went back to the house, dripping wet, heart pounding in my ears. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know what came next. I'd been ignoring this gut feeling since I found Charlie, but after what I'd just seen, there was no pushing it away. The toy had predicted something terrible, and even though I hadn't believed it, it was right. By the time I got back inside, the place felt colder somehow, like the rain had seeped in. And of course, because the universe loves a good twist, there was Charlie, sitting on the table, right where I'd put him away the night before. The closet door was still shut tight, like I'd never shoved him in there to begin with. I stared at him for a long time, just standing in the middle of the kitchen, soaked and freezing. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But there he was, sitting there like nothing had happened, those glassy eyes staring at me. And I swear to you, I wasn't imagining it. Then, the clang. That damn cymbal sound again. I didn't even touch him. Didn't wind him up. He just started clanging his little cymbals together, slow at first, then faster, like he was mocking me, daring me to ignore him again. I watched in a sort of stunned silence, not sure whether to throw him out the window or set him on fire. That's when I saw the next message. Scratched into the wood next to fire was another word, bridge. I didn't have time to process it. Not really, because the second I saw that word, I knew there was no going back. Charlie wasn't done, and somehow, neither was I. You ever have one of those moments where you're just stuck? Like you don't know if you should laugh, cry, or just walk out the door and keep walking until none of it matters anymore? That's where I was, standing in my mom's kitchen, dripping rain all over the floor, staring at this creepy little monkey toy that had somehow just predicted a fire and was now warning me about a bridge. A bridge. Part of me was still trying to convince myself I was losing it. I mean, seriously, what else could explain it? I'd been back in Maplewood for less than 48 hours, and here I was, listening to warnings from a toy like I was some kind of deranged prophet. The other part of me couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was real. And that was terrifying. So I did what any rational person would do when they're faced with a possessed toy. I called my friend Rachel. Rachel and I had grown up together. She lived just a few streets over and had been one of the only people from my childhood I stayed in touch with. If anyone was going to listen to me without immediately calling the men in white coats, it was her. When she picked up the phone, she sounded groggy, probably because it was still early and I was calling out of the blue. "Tom? You okay?" she asked, her voice crackling through the bad reception. I wasn't okay, but I sure as hell wasn't going to tell her that. Instead, I told her I needed to talk, like right now, and asked if she could come over. I think she could tell something was off because she didn't ask any questions. She just said she'd be there in 20. While I waited, I tried to clean up a little, even though the house felt like a haunted museum. Every time I passed by Charlie, I could feel his stupid little eyes on me, like he was just waiting to see what I'd do next. I avoided looking at the new scratch on the table, bridge, because it made my head hurt to think about what it could mean. Rachel showed up a little later, shaking off her umbrella as she stepped inside. She gave me this look, half worried, half skeptical. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, hanging up her coat by the door. I didn't even know where to start, so I just told her everything. The fire, the scratches on the table, Charlie clanging his cymbals on his own. I could tell she didn't really believe me. Not at first, but she was trying to be supportive, nodding along, her face scrunched up in that way people get when they're listening to something they think is total BS. "Tom, I know you've been through a lot, and coming back here after all this time, it's probably messing with your head," she said carefully, like she was talking me down from a ledge. "But a toy predicting fires? Bridges? I mean, come on." I felt my frustration boiling over. I wasn't crazy. I didn't just imagine this. And then, without thinking, I pointed at the table. Look at the damn table, Rachel." She leaned over, her eyes narrowing at the word bridge scratched into the wood. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she didn't quite know what to say. It was one thing to hear about it. It was another to see it right there, clear as day. I could see her starting to second-guess herself, starting to realize this wasn't just me being paranoid. "So what? You think something's going to happen on the bridge?" she asked, still sounding skeptical but less dismissive. "I don't know," I admitted. "But after the fire, I don't think we can ignore it." Rachel didn't say anything for a while. She just sat there, staring at the table, her fingers tracing the letters as if she was trying to make sense of them. Finally, she sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "Okay, let's say for a second that you're right. What are we supposed to do? Call the cops and tell them a toy told us the bridge is going to collapse?" That's when it hit me. The bridge collapse. There had been rumors for years that the old Maplewood Bridge was unstable. The town had been debating whether to tear it down, but they kept pushing it off because of funding or some other bureaucratic crap. The thing was practically falling apart. "What if we just go check it out?" I suggested. "We can go see if there's anything weird going on. Maybe stop people from driving over it if we have to." Rachel gave me a long look, the kind that said, "I think this is a terrible idea, but I can't let you do it alone." Finally, she nodded. "All right, let's go." So, we got in my car and headed toward the bridge. The rain had picked up again, just a steady drizzle this time, enough to make the roads slick. The whole way there, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Charlie sitting in the back seat, cymbals ready to start clanging again. Thankfully, he stayed in the house, for now. When we got to the bridge, it looked the same as it always did. Rusty, old, like something out of a bad horror movie. There weren't many cars on the road, but a few were coming and going, driving over the bridge like they had no idea what kind of death trap it was. We pulled off to the side, and Rachel turned to me. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked, as if I had some kind of plan. I didn't. I was just going with my gut, which at that point was screaming at me that something bad was going to happen. We got out of the car, and the sound of the rain hitting the metal structure was loud, almost like it was warning us to stay away. We walked across the bridge, checking the beams and cables, looking for anything that seemed off. And then we saw it. A crack. A long, jagged crack running along one of the support beams underneath the bridge. It looked bad. Worse than bad, actually. Like the whole thing could give out at any moment. "Holy shit," Rachel whispered. "You aren't kidding?" I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved that I wasn't losing my mind, or horrified that the bridge really was about to collapse. Either way, we didn't have much time. I pulled out my phone and called 911, trying to explain the situation without sounding like a lunatic. "There's a crack in the support beam on the Maplewood Bridge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It looks like it's about to collapse." The operator said they'd send someone out to check, but it didn't feel like enough. We couldn't just wait around and hope they got here in time. Cars were still driving over the bridge, completely unaware of the danger they were in. Rachel and I stood at the edge of the road, waving our arms, trying to get people to stop. Most of them just ignored us, splashing water on us as they drove by. It wasn't until one car, a silver sedan with a family inside, slowed down that I felt like we might be doing some good. The driver rolled down the window, looking at us like we were crazy, but I didn't care. I told him to turn around, that the bridge wasn't safe. He looked at the crack, then at us, and finally backed up, turning his car around. We kept waving down cars until the police finally arrived. They blocked off the road and evacuated the bridge, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too close. We'd come within minutes of a disaster, all because of a toy monkey. As we stood there watching the police put up barricades and talk into their radios, Rachel turned to me, her face pale. "Tom, how did you know?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't explain it. All I knew was that Charlie had warned me, and I hadn't listened soon enough. And as we got back into the car, soaking wet and exhausted, I couldn't help but wonder, what would he tell me next? Rachel and I drove back to my mom's house in silence, the rain tapping steadily against the windshield. I think we were both trying to wrap our heads around what just happened. I mean, how do you even begin to process the fact that a creepy old toy is predicting disasters? It's not exactly the kind of thing you chat about over coffee. When we got back, the house felt heavier somehow, like the air was thicker. I don't know if it was the stress of everything, but walking back in, it was like the walls were closing in. Or maybe I was just starting to see the house differently, now that I knew Charlie wasn't just some harmless childhood relic. Rachel sat down on the couch, clearly shaken, while I stood there, staring at the box where I'd shoved Charlie after the whole fire thing. I wasn't sure what to do. Do I throw him away? Burn him? Part of me wanted to just toss him in the trash and never think about him again. But another part of me, the part that had seen that crack on the bridge, knew I couldn't just ignore it. Not after what had happened. So, what now? Rachel finally asked, breaking the silence. I didn't have an answer. My mind was spinning, sense of everything. Then something hit me. Something I hadn't thought about in years. Ellie, my little sister, Ellie, had been terrified of Charlie. I hadn't thought about it in so long, but when I was a kid, she used to beg me to get rid of him. She'd cry sometimes when I brought him out to play, saying she didn't like the way he looked at her. I'd always just thought she was being a scared little kid, like how some kids are afraid of clowns or the dark. I never took it seriously, but now I wasn't so sure. I think I need to talk to my dad, I said, almost to myself. Rachel frowned. Your dad? You haven't talked to him in years. She was right. My dad had left when I was 13, not long after Ellie died. The old man had pretty much fallen off the map after that. No letters, no phone calls, nothing. I hadn't exactly made an effort to reconnect either. But something about all this... Something told me he might know more than I did. After all, Charlie had been a gift from my dad's side of the family, some distant uncle or cousin. Maybe there was more to the story than I remembered. Rachel didn't say anything when I picked up my phone and dialed the number I hadn't used in years. I wasn't even sure if it would still work, but after a few rings, I heard his voice. Hello? It was weird hearing his voice after so long. It sounded older, more tired. I almost hung up, but I forced myself to speak. Dad, it's Tom. There was a long palm? Is that really you? Yeah, it's me, I said, feeling like I was 13 again, awkward and unsure. Listen, I need to ask you something about Charlie. There was another pause, and I swear I heard him sigh on the other end. Charlie? The monkey toy? Yeah, I said. Do you remember where it came from? Who gave it to me? There was a rustling sound on the line, like he was shifting in his chair. It was from your Uncle Walter. He was a toy maker, you know. Died when you were still a kid, left all his toys to the family. I hadn't heard that name in years. Uncle Walter? He was one of those relatives you never really know, but hear about at family gatherings. The kind of guy who sits in the corner quietly, smiling at everyone but never saying much. I barely remembered him, but now that Dad mentioned it, I did vaguely recall Walter giving me Charlie as a birthday gift. Why are you asking about him? Dad's voice sounded uneasy. Because the toy isn't normal, Dad. Weird stuff's been happening. It's predicting things. Bad things. Like the fire at the orphanage and the bridge collapse. I think there's something wrong with it. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear him processing what I'd just said, trying to decide whether I'd completely lost it. Tom, listen to me. he said slowly. Walter wasn't just a toy maker. He was into some strange stuff. I didn't tell you this when you were a kid because I didn't think it mattered, but he was obsessed with the occult. I'm talking about rituals, curses, all that dark stuff. He believed his toys were vessels, like they could hold something. Spirits, maybe, or worse. I felt my stomach twist. So you're saying Charlie is... what? Possessed? I don't know, Dad admitted. But Walter wasn't right in the head. After he died, some of the toys he made started showing up in weird places. Families reported accidents, strange deaths, but no one could ever prove anything. It was just stories. I was quiet for a moment, letting that sink in. Stories, accidents, deaths. Was this what Ellie had been afraid of all those years ago? Had she known somehow that Charlie was dangerous? What do I do, Dad? I asked, my voice sounding small, even to me. There was another long pause before he answered. If I were you, I'd get rid of it. Burn it. Bury it. Whatever you have to do. Just don't keep it in your house. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I couldn't. I didn't even know what to say. Rachel was looking at me with wide eyes, clearly trying to piece together what she'd overheard. So, your uncle was into some weird stuff? She asked, trying to keep her voice light, but I could hear the worry underneath. Yeah, I said, running a hand over my face. And I think Charlie's one of his creations. Rachel didn't say anything for a while, just sat there staring at the toy box like it might burst open at any second. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to make sense of everything, just like I was. What if burning it doesn't work, she asked quietly. What if whatever's in Charlie doesn't go away? I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that Charlie wasn't just some toy from my childhood anymore. He was something darker, something worse. And I didn't know if I could stop it. But I had to try. I'm burning it, I said, more to myself than to Rachel. She nodded, though she still looked uneasy. I'll help. We went out to the backyard, the rain having slowed to a drizzle. I grabbed Charlie from the box, his little glass eyes staring at me like he knew what I was about to do. For a second I hesitated, but then I remembered the fire. The bridge. Ellie. I wasn't going to let this thing hurt anyone else. Rachel grabbed some old newspapers, and we piled them up in the fire pit. I set Charlie down on top of the paper, the little monkey grinning up at me like this was all some big joke. I lit a match, my hand shaking just a little, and dropped it onto the pile. The flames caught quickly, spreading across the paper and licking at Charlie's fur. For a moment I thought it was going to work. The flames grew higher, orange and hot, the smell of burning plastic filling the air. But then, just as the fire was about to consume him, Charlie's cymbals started clanging. Once, twice, faster and faster. And then, the fire went out. Just like that. Gone. Snuffed out. And Charlie was still sitting there. For a long time, Rachel and I just stood there, staring at Charlie. The fire pit was cold, like someone had dumped a bucket of water on it, but I hadn't touched a thing. It was as if the flames had never even existed. The smell of burnt paper lingered in the air, but there he was, Charlie, sitting right in the middle of the pit, untouched. His little cymbals had gone silent again, but I could still feel the echo of their clanging, like it was ringing in my ears. Rachel took a step back, her face pale. Tom, what the hell just happened? I didn't answer her because I didn't know. I'd seen a lot of strange things over the past couple of days, but this? A fire just going out on its own? This was different. This wasn't just Charlie warning me about something. This was him telling me that I wasn't in control. Not anymore. I picked him up, my fingers shaking a little. He felt warm in my hands, but not hot enough to have been in a fire. The weight of him was wrong too, heavier than before, like he was holding something. Something alive. Rachel stepped forward, but she didn't touch him. We need to get rid of it. Now. There's got to be another way. Maybe we bury it, or throw it in the river. Or... I don't think that'll work, I interrupted. I could feel it in my gut. No matter what we tried, Charlie wasn't going anywhere. Not unless he wanted to. I was just about to tell Rachel we needed to rethink this whole thing when it happened. That sound. The slow, rhythmic clanging of those cymbals. At first, I thought I was hearing things again like I had back in the house, but then Rachel's eyes widened. She heard it too. And then I saw it. Scratched into the dirt at the bottom of the fire pit. Another word. Rachel. I blinked, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. No, 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 no. Rachel leaned over my shoulder, squinting. "What does it say?" she asked, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I couldn't make the words come out. The symbols clanged again, louder this time, faster, like he was taunting me. I grabbed her by the arm. "We need to leave," I said, pulling her back toward the house. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that whatever was happening, we had to get away from Charlie. But before we could take more than a few steps, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It felt wrong to pull it out right then, like I was breaking the moment. But something told me I needed to check it. I flipped it open. Yeah, I still had one of those old flip phones, and there was a message on the screen. Accident on Route 4. Rain causing slippery conditions, multiple vehicles involved. And there it was. A notification from some news app I never remembered downloading, flashing across my phone like it was just another update. Except it wasn't just another update. Route 4. That's where Rachel lived. I turned to her, my voice shaky. "We can't go to your place." "What? Why not?" "There's been an accident on Route 4. It's you, Rachel. Charlie's warning me about you." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but I could see the doubt creeping in. "Tom, we don't know that." But we did. I knew it, and deep down, so did she. There was no coincidence here. Charlie had predicted the fire. He'd predicted the bridge collapse, and now he was predicting her. "I'm not going home," she said firmly, shaking her head. "I'm not going anywhere near Route 4. But then, the cymbals started clanging again. Fast, furious, almost like they were screaming at us. I looked down at Charlie, sitting there in my hands, and I realized something. Charlie didn't predict disasters. He caused them. I dropped him like he was burning my skin, stepping away from him like he might jump up and attack me. "He's not warning us, Rachel. He's making this happen." She froze, staring at me like she was waiting for me to tell her I was kidding, but I wasn't. Everything that had happened, every disaster, every close call, it had all been leading up to this. Charlie wasn't just some haunted toy giving out warnings. He was orchestrating everything. He wanted to hurt us, and now Rachel was next. "We have to stop him," I said, pacing, trying to think. "We have to, I don't know, destroy him for real this time." Rachel was already shaking her head. "We tried. The fire didn't work. What else can we do?" I didn't have an answer, but then an idea hit me. "What if we don't destroy him?" I said, slowly piecing it together. "What if we trap him?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Trap him? How?" "Look, I don't know all the details, but my uncle, the guy who made him, he was into some weird occult stuff. Maybe that's how Charlie got like this. But if he could put whatever's inside Charlie into the toy, maybe we can put it back. Trap it." It was a shot in the dark, but at that point, it was all I had. Rachel didn't look convinced, but she also didn't have a better plan. So we did the only thing that made sense at the time. We went back into the house, digging through all the junk my mom had kept over the years, searching for anything that might give us a clue about what my uncle had done to Charlie. We found an old box of papers, and tucked inside was an old leather-bound notebook with faded, yellowing pages. It was Uncle Walter's journal. Most of it was scribbles, ramblings about how toys could be used as vessels for spirits or energies. Honestly, half of it didn't make sense to me. But then we found it. A page that talked about binding. A ritual, Walter had written, that could trap whatever was inside the toy back where it belonged. There was one catch. The person doing the ritual had to be the original owner. That was me. I read through the steps quickly, my hands shaking a little as I skimmed the pages. Salt, candles, and a few words I didn't quite understand. Simple, but it sounded like the kind of thing that shouldn't be messed with. But at this point, what choice did I have? Rachel and I gathered what we needed. It felt like we were moving in slow motion, the air around us heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I set Charlie down in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by a circle of salt. The candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch too far across the walls. And then I started the ritual. The words felt foreign, ancient, like they didn't belong in my mouth. But I spoke them anyway, my voice steady, even though everything inside me was screaming to stop. As I chanted, I felt something shift in the air, like the world was holding its breath. Charlie didn't move. He just sat there, his symbols still, his glassy eyes staring up at me. Then, just as I finished the last word, I felt a sudden release. The candles flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, everything was silent. Rachel whispered, "Did it work?" I didn't know. I reached down and picked up Charlie. He was cold, lifeless, just a toy. No clanging cymbals, no scratched messages. It was over. At least that's what I thought. But as Rachel and I stood there, staring down at Charlie, something caught my eye. One last message, scratched into the floor beneath the toy, barely visible in the dim light from the window. "Tom, soon." Okay, so let me tell you how this all started. I was fixing the cemetery gate. That's right. Of all the places in town, I was spending my Tuesday afternoon with a rusted-out pile of iron on the edge of Willow Ridge Cemetery. Sounds charming, right? Well, it wasn't exactly by choice. The storm we had last winter knocked half the fence down, and since I'm the town's go-to guy for anything remotely related to fixing things, I got the job. And let's be real, it's not like I had much else going on, so I figured, why not? It was raining that day. Not a heavy downpour or anything, just that kind of steady drizzle that makes everything soggy and miserable. You know what I mean, right? The type of rain where your jeans get wet from the knees down and you can feel it creeping up your legs, but you're too far from home to go change, so you just suck it up. Yeah, that kind. Anyway, I'm out there with my tools, half paying attention to the fence and half thinking about what I'm going to grab for dinner later. That's when I hear it. Now, I know how this is going to sound, but I swear on my life, I heard someone whisper my name. It wasn't like one of those wind through the trees moments. This was specific. Clear as day, someone just goes, "Ben?" I remember straightening up, looking around like a complete idiot, because, honestly, who was going to be out there in that weather, right? The place was dead quiet, except for the rain, and no one else was around. And you'd think I'd laugh it off, but something about it just stuck with me. Like, I've heard wind, I've heard people messing around, but this? No way this was the wind. I shook it off, figuring maybe I'd been out in the rain too long, or maybe I was just hungry, because trust me, I get weird when I'm hungry, but still, it lingered. I finished up the gate, packed my stuff, and got the hell out of there. It wasn't until later that night when things got weirder. I was sitting in my living room, zoning out to whatever show I'd put on, when I get this call. It's Marcy, my neighbor. Sweet lady, always baking pies or inviting me over for some ridiculous church event I couldn't care less about. She sounds a little off, like not herself. She says, "Ben, can you come over? I think he's here." Now, Marcy's been alone since her husband Dave passed a few years back. Nice guy. Worked down at the hardware store. Died of a stroke, just like that. She's been, well, lonely, I guess. So I figured she was just having one of those days where grief hits her harder than usual. So of course I throw on my jacket and head over. By the time I get there, it's still raining, coming down a little heavier now, and she's standing in her doorway, looking, I don't know, kind of dazed. Her hair's a mess. She's still in her bathrobe, and she's just staring out into the night like she's expecting someone to walk up the driveway any second. I ask her if everything's okay, but she doesn't answer. She just stares past me and says, "Dave's been talking to me." And let me tell you, that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I follow her inside, and the place is just not what I expected. There's dirt everywhere, like she'd been digging. And I'm not talking about a little mess from her plants. I'm talking full-on clumps of earth, as if she'd been out in the garden during a rainstorm, hands deep in the mud. She leads me to the kitchen, and I swear to you, it's like walking into someone else's house. Normally, her place smells like cookies or some kind of casserole, but this time, it's just damp. Cold, like the air inside has soaked up the rain from outside. She sits down, looking at her kitchen table like it's going to give her the answers she's searching for. And then she tells me. She says, "He's mad at me, Ben. He keeps saying things I forgot about, things I thought I'd let go of. But he won't let me forget." I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, what do you say to someone who's convinced their dead husband is whispering old arguments to them from beyond the grave? Part of me thought maybe it was just grief playing tricks on her mind, but another part, if I'm being honest, wasn't so sure. She looked at me, eyes red and tired, and said, "I hear him at night, out there by the cemetery. I think he wants me to come back, to see him." Now, I'm not a believer in the paranormal or any of that spooky crap, but something about the way she said it, well, let's just say it left me feeling uneasy. I told her to get some rest, said I'd come back in the morning to check on her. She nodded, but didn't seem all there. As I left, I glanced back, and she was already staring out the window again, looking in the direction of the cemetery. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it. So, the next morning, I wake up to this ridiculous banging on my door. I'm thinking it's probably the mailman or some kid messing around, but nope, it's Sarah. You know, Sarah from the diner? The one who makes the best damn pancakes in Willow Ridge? Yeah, her. She's standing there on my porch, soaked to the bone, looking like she's seen a ghost. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I've never seen Sarah rattled like this before. She's usually the one holding it all together, raising her kid, running the diner, keeping everyone's coffee cups full. So seeing her in that state, definitely not normal. She doesn't even say hi, just barges in and starts pacing around my living room, dripping rainwater all over the place. Finally, I'm like, "Sarah, what the hell's going on?" She stops, looks at me with these wide eyes and says, "It's happening again. I thought it was just me, but I talked to Marcy's daughter, and now I'm freaked out." My brain's barely working at this point. I mean, it's still early, I haven't had my coffee, and here's Sarah talking in circles. So I ask her to slow down, and she tells me something that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Not literally, but you get the idea. She says, "I'm hearing my dad." Now, I knew Sarah's dad. He died when we were still in high school. Drunk driving accident, hit a tree out on Old Mill Road. Everyone in town knew about it. Her mom moved away after, but Sarah stayed, took over the diner, built a life for herself. Never talked about him, though. Not once. She sits down on my couch, finally, and starts explaining. For the past week, she's been hearing his voice. At first, it was small things, like she thought she heard him muttering to himself while she was in the kitchen at the diner. But then it started getting worse. He wasn't just muttering anymore. He was accusing her of things she hadn't even thought about in years. He keeps talking about that night, she says, staring at her hands like they're gonna give her some sort of answer. About how I didn't stop him. About how I let him drive. Now, I don't know the full story. Nobody really did. But from what I heard over the years, Sarah had been with him that night. She was only 16, didn't have her license, so she couldn't exactly stop him from getting behind the wheel. But guilt's a tricky thing, right? It clings to you in ways you don't expect. She goes on saying that every night when she closes up the diner and heads home, she hears him, louder. Sometimes it's like he's right there in the room with her, telling her she's just like him. A failure. A drunk. Useless. You know, the kind of stuff no one wants to hear from their dead dad. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if there's something in the water, or if maybe the whole town's just collectively losing it. But then Sarah hits me with the kicker. "I saw Marcy yesterday," she says, lowering her voice like someone else might be listening. She was talking about Dave, saying he's been keeping her up at night, and then I found out what happened to her. Now, this got my attention. I didn't know Marcy had passed, let alone what the circumstances were, but the look on Sarah's face told me it wasn't peaceful. Turns out Marcy had been found wandering around the cemetery again, in the pouring rain, talking to no one. She was clutching her husband's old fishing hat like it was a lifeline. A few days later, she just didn't wake up. Doctors said it was a heart attack, but Sarah wasn't buying it. Then, she says, leaning in close, "There's something wrong with that cemetery." Now, I'm not one to believe in curses or haunted places, but I couldn't ignore the fact that something was definitely off. Marcy hearing Dave, Sarah hearing her dad, and me? Well, I hadn't told anyone yet, but I'd been hearing my mom. I didn't want to say it out loud because it felt, I don't know, ridiculous. My mom passed when I was a kid, and I'd long since made peace with it, or so I thought. But lately, especially after spending all that time near the cemetery, I'd been hearing her voice. Sometimes it was just her humming that stupid lullaby she used to sing when I couldn't sleep. Other times, it was worse, like her voice would drop into this accusatory tone, like she was blaming me for something. I hadn't told anyone because, honestly, what was I supposed to say? Hey guys, I think the cemeteries need me hear my dead mom's greatest hits. Yeah, no. I didn't want to end up being the town crazy. But now, hearing Sarah talk about her dad and Marcy, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on wasn't just in our heads. What do we do? Sarah asks, looking to me like I have some sort of master plan. Hell if I know. But I do know one thing. If the cemetery's involved, we need to go there. We need to figure out what the hell is going on. So we decide we'll head over there later that night, after Sarah closes the diner. I wasn't thrilled about it, but at that point, what choice did I have? The place was starting to feel like the source of everything. The whispers, the memories, the voices we didn't want to hear. As the rain picked up outside, I couldn't help but wonder what we'd find out there, and whether we'd regret going. Because part of me already knew this was going to get worse before it got better. So, fast forward to that night. Sarah and I are standing outside the cemetery gate, the rain coming down harder than ever. It's one of those nights where you can barely see 2 feet in front of you, you know? Everything's slick, muddy, and miserable. Great weather for checking out haunted cemeteries, obviously. Part of me was hoping she'd back out, say it was too late or too wet or that we were just being stupid. But no, Sarah was dead set on getting answers. I had my flashlight, and Sarah brought along her dad's old crowbar. Why? I'm not sure. Maybe she figured if we ran into any ghosts, she could smack them back to the afterlife. Not exactly a great plan, but it made me feel a little better knowing we had something, anything to defend ourselves if things got weird. The place looked different at night. I mean, I'd been here 100 times before in the daylight, fixing stuff up, but in the dark, it was like a whole other world. The rain made everything shine, and the old tombstones cast these long, creepy shadows that seemed to stretch out forever. I'm not usually one to get spooked, but something about that place after sundown just felt wrong. We walked past Marcy's husband's grave first. It was fresh, the dirt still packed loosely on top. Sarah glanced at it, but neither of us said anything. What could we say, really? It wasn't like he was going to sit up and start talking to us. Or at least, I hoped not. The further we got, the heavier the air seemed to get. I know that sounds dramatic, but I'm telling you, something wasn't right. We both felt it. Like we weren't supposed to be there. Like the place itself was pushing back against us. The rain wasn't helping either, coming down in sheets and making everything slick. More than once, I thought about just turning around and calling it a night. But Sarah was determined, and I wasn't about to leave her there alone. Finally, we reached the center of the cemetery, where the old oak tree stood. That thing had been there longer than the town itself. Or at least that's what the local stories said. Big, gnarled branches, roots spreading out like claws across the ground. It was massive, kind of hard to miss. People used to say it was the heart of the place, that everything about the cemetery revolved around that tree. Sarah looked at me, her face lit up by the flashlight, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. "This is it," she said. "It has to be." I wasn't exactly sure what it was supposed to be, but I nodded. We started poking around, looking for something, anything, that might explain what was going on. At first, it was just mud, roots, and old moss-covered gravestones. Nothing out of the ordinary for a cemetery. But then I noticed something strange near the base of the tree. The ground looked disturbed, like someone had been digging, but not recently. This wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either, if that makes any sense. I knelt down, pushing some of the mud aside with my hands. That's when I saw it, an old, rusty box, half buried under the roots. Now, I'm not an expert in spooky cemetery finds, but if something's buried under the roots of a tree in the middle of a cemetery, it probably shouldn't be disturbed. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was pulling the thing out. It was heavy, covered in dirt and rust, but mostly intact. Sarah crouched down next to me, wiping some of the mud off the top. "What do you think it is?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. I shrugged, only one way to find out. We pried the box open with her dad's crowbar, and inside, we found... Well, it wasn't exactly treasure, if that's what you're thinking. There were these old, faded trinkets, rings, necklaces, little personal items, the kind of things people leave behind when they're saying goodbye to someone. But they didn't belong to any one person. They were all different, like offerings. It hit me then. These weren't just random trinkets. They were memories. People's memories. Sarah picked up a ring, turning it over in her hands, and I could see something change in her expression. She looked haunted. I know, but I don't have another word for it. It was like she recognized it, even though she'd never seen it before. And that's when the whispering started again. Sarah. I swear to you, it was louder this time. Not just in our heads, but like it was coming from all around us. Sarah dropped the ring like it burned her, and we both scrambled to our feet. The whispering didn't stop, though. It got louder, overlapping voices, like a crowd all trying to talk at once, each one trying to be heard over the others. That's when Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. We need to leave. Now. I didn't argue. We grabbed the flashlight and the crowbar and booked it back toward the gate, but the whispering followed us the whole way. It wasn't just her dad's voice anymore. I heard my mom. I heard Marcy. I heard voices I didn't even recognize, all telling me things I didn't want to hear, things I'd buried deep down and never wanted to dig up. By the time we reached the gate, we were both soaked to the bone, covered in mud, and completely freaked out. We didn't stop running until we were back at my place, where we slammed the door behind us and stood there, dripping rainwater all over the floor, trying to catch our breath. What the hell was that? Sarah finally asked, her voice shaking. I didn't have an answer for her, but one thing was clear. Whatever was going on in that cemetery, it wasn't just in our heads. Those voices, those memories, they were real, and they weren't going to stop haunting us until we figured out how to shut them up. As we sat there in silence, listening to the rain pound against the windows, part of me wondered if it was too late, if maybe we'd already dug too deep. By the time the next morning rolled around, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the voices from the cemetery, like they were waiting just outside my window. And judging by the look on Sarah's face when she came by the diner for coffee, she hadn't slept either. We both knew something was very, very wrong. So, there we were, sitting in one of the booths at the back of the diner, rain still coming down outside like it had no plans to stop anytime soon, trying to figure out our next move. I had one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee, the other drumming nervously on the table. Sarah just stared into her cup like it had all the answers. We have to go back, she finally said, breaking the silence. Are you serious? I asked, a little louder than I meant to. I mean, we had barely made it out of that cemetery without completely losing it. Going back seemed like the last thing we should be doing. But Sarah wasn't looking at me like I was crazy. She was dead serious. There's something we're missing, she said. Those voices, the things they're saying, it's not random, Ben. It's not just memories. They're angry. They want something, and we need to figure out what. I could tell she wasn't going to let this go, so I sighed and leaned back in the booth. Okay, fine. But we're not going back without a plan. We can't just wander around that place again, hoping something jumps out at us. That's when it hit me. There was one person in town who might know more about the cemetery than anyone else. What about Lydia? I asked. You know, the librarian? Sarah gave me this confused look, but I could see the wheels turning. Lydia had been the town librarian forever, or at least it felt that way. She was one of those people who just seemed to know everything about everything, especially when it came to the town's history. If anyone knew about that creepy old oak tree and the weird stuff going on in the cemetery, it'd be her. So that afternoon, we went to see Lydia. The library was practically empty. No surprise there. Most people in Willow Ridge didn't spend their rainy afternoons reading books. But Lydia? She was there, sitting behind the front desk, reading some ancient-looking book like always. She looked up when we walked in, gave us this small smile, and said, "I've been expecting you." Okay, I know that sounds like something straight out of a bad horror movie, but trust me, that's exactly what she said. I remember Sarah shooting me this wide-eyed look, like what the hell? But we kept going. We sat down across from her, and I didn't even bother beating around the bush. What do you know about the cemetery? I asked. Lydia didn't even flinch. She closed her book, folded her hands on the desk, and just looked at us for a long moment, like she was deciding how much to tell us. Then she started talking. "You're not the first ones to hear the voices," she said. "It's been happening for generations. But it's not the dead you're hearing, it's their memories, the things they couldn't let go of, the things that haunt them even after they're gone." Sarah and I just sat there, stunned. It was one of those moments where you feel like everything you thought you knew is suddenly flipped upside down. Lydia went on, explaining that the cemetery wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. No ghosts, no spirits wandering around. But the memories of the dead, those were real. And they were alive in a way. "It all started with Jedediah Crow," Lydia said, her voice soft but steady. Now, I'd heard the name before. Everyone in town had. Jedediah Crow was the cemetery's caretaker back in the 1800s. But the stories about him were always vague, just the usual creepy old guy stuff. But what Lydia told us was way darker. Jedediah, she explained, wasn't just a caretaker. He was obsessed with memory, with the idea that people lived on as long as their memories were preserved. But he didn't stop at preserving memories through stories or keepsakes. No, he wanted something more permanent. So, he performed a ritual, one that bound the memories of the dead to the cemetery itself. The oak tree at the center? That was the anchor, the heart of the ritual. "He thought he was doing something good," Lydia said, her eyes flicking from me to Sarah. But it went wrong. Instead of peaceful memories, the ritual trapped the darkest parts of people's lives. Their guilt, their anger, their regrets. And now, those memories are feeding on the living. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Feeding on us?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. Lydia nodded. "Every time you hear the voices, they're pulling you in, making you remember things you'd rather forget. And the more you remember, the stronger they get." Sarah's face went pale. I could tell she was thinking about her dad, about all the things he'd been saying to her in those whispers. It wasn't just grief playing tricks on her. It was something real, something alive, feeding off her worst memories. "How do we stop it?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Lydia hesitated for a moment before she spoke again. "The ritual can be undone, but it won't be easy. You'll need to destroy the anchor." "The tree," Sarah whispered, like the word itself tasted bad in her mouth. Lydia nodded again. "The oak tree is the key. Destroy it, and the memories will be released. But be careful. Once you start, the voices will do everything they can to stop you. They'll use your own past against you." I glanced at Sarah, and she gave me a quick, determined nod. We didn't have a choice. If we didn't stop it, the voices would keep getting stronger, and more people in town would end up like Marcy, buried in their own guilt, their own regrets. That night, we gathered what we needed: tools, gasoline, anything that would help us take down that tree. I wasn't looking forward to burning down a 200-year-old oak in the middle of a cemetery, but it had to be done. And as we left the library, the rain still pounding against the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because if Lydia was right, the voices weren't going to let us do this without a fight. I won't lie to you, going back to the cemetery that night, knowing what we had to do, felt like walking into a nightmare. The rain was still coming down hard, thick sheets of it pelting the windshield as Sarah drove us to the cemetery, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I had the gas can and some tools rattling around in the back seat, but neither of us said much. What was there to say, really? We both knew what we were up against. The voices, the memories, they were going to come at us with everything they had. We parked just outside the cemetery gate, and for a second, neither of us moved. It was like we were both waiting for the other to say, hey, let's not do this. Let's just go home. Pretend none of this is happening. But that wasn't an option anymore. So I grabbed the gas can, Sarah grabbed the crowbar, and we headed into the cemetery. The place was eerily quiet, except for the rain tapping on the gravestones. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, but it barely made a dent in the thick, wet night. We made our way toward the oak tree, our shoes squishing in the mud, and that's when it started. The whispers. At first they were faint, like they were coming from far off. But the closer we got to the tree, the louder they grew. Not just one voice either. It was like a whole crowd of people, all talking at once, overlapping, jumbled, but somehow each one clear. Then, That was my mom's voice again, cutting through the rest like a knife. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart thudding in my chest, but Sarah grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. We didn't have time to freak out. "You should have helped me." Her voice was louder now, practically yelling, and I could see flashes of her in my mind. The bathroom, the water. That day I found her. It was like being dragged back into a memory I'd shoved down for years. But I couldn't let it stop me. Not now. We reached the oak tree, its massive trunk towering over us like some ancient, angry god. The roots spread out in every direction, thick and gnarled, half covered by mud. This was it, the anchor, the thing holding all those memories in place, feeding them, giving them power. I set the gas can down and unscrewed the cap, but before I could even pour the gas, Sarah dropped to her knees, clutching her head. No, it wasn't my fault," she cried, her voice raw, desperate. I rushed to her side, shaking her, trying to snap her out of it, but her eyes were glazed over, locked on something I couldn't see. "He said it was my fault. He always said it was my fault." Her dad's voice. I knew it without her saying a word. Whatever guilt she'd been carrying all these years was flooding her mind, just like the voices were doing to me. I could hear my mom again, louder now, angrier. "You left me. You didn't help me." I shook my head, trying to drown her out, trying to focus on what I had to do. The gas. The tree. We needed to burn it down, end this, before the voices tore us apart. I pulled Sarah to her feet, practically dragging her away from the memories clawing at her mind. "Sarah, listen to me," I yelled. "It's not real. It's just the voices, okay? You didn't do anything wrong. This is what they want. They want you to believe it. But it's not true." She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and for a second, I wasn't sure she could even hear me, but then she nodded. Just a small nod, but it was enough. We got back to work. I poured the gasoline all over the base of the tree, soaking the roots, the ground around it. The voices were screaming now, louder than ever, overlapping, echoing inside my head. I could hear my mom, Sarah's dad, Marcy, and a bunch of voices I didn't even recognize, all telling me the things I'd done wrong, the things I'd tried so hard to forget. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Sarah grabbed the matches from her jacket pocket, her hands shaking, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. What if this doesn't work?" she whispered, barely audible over the rain and the voices. "It'll work," I said, hoping like hell I was right. She lit the match, and for a second, we both just stood there, staring at the tiny flicker of flame in the middle of all that darkness. Then she tossed it onto the gas-soaked roots. The fire caught almost instantly, a bright, angry blaze that spread up the tree faster than I thought possible. The flames licked at the branches, crackling and snapping, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. For a second, I thought maybe it was over, that the voices would just disappear. But then they got louder, screaming. It was like the fire had woken something up, something buried deep in the ground, something that didn't want to be disturbed. The tree groaned, creaking like it was alive, and I swear I saw the roots shift under the dirt. The flames climbed higher, wrapping around the trunk, swallowing it whole. And that's when I saw her. My mom, standing just beyond the flames, her figure flickering in the light, her eyes locked on mine. She wasn't real. I knew that. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She looked just like she did the day she died, her face pale, her hair damp, her expression full of something. "You could have saved me," she said, her voice cutting through the fire, cutting through me. I wanted to tell her it wasn't true, that I'd been a kid, that there was nothing I could have done. But I couldn't get the words out. I just stood there, staring at her, my heart hammering in my chest. But then, as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The fire roared louder, the flames reaching the top of the tree, and suddenly, the voices stopped. Just like that. Silence. The tree groaned one last time before it split right down the middle, falling in on itself in a shower of sparks and ash. The rain poured down, but the fire kept burning, the flames slowly dying out as the oak tree crumbled into nothing. And with it, the voices were gone. Sarah and I stood there for what felt like hours, watching the fire burn itself out, listening to the rain wash away the last traces of whatever it was that had been haunting us. "It's over," I finally said, my voice hoarse. Sarah didn't say anything, just nodded, still staring at the smoldering remains of the tree. We left the cemetery that night, soaked, tired, and maybe a little bit broken. But we left knowing we'd done what we had to do. The voices, the memories, they weren't going to haunt us anymore. But the thing is, I still think about that night. About the tree, about the voices, about the things they said. And part of me wonders if maybe some memories don't ever really go away. Maybe some things stick with you, no matter how hard you try to burn them down. But for now, Willow Ridge is quiet, and that's enough. I'm not usually the kind of guy who buys random junk at yard sales, but there I was on a rainy Saturday evening, wandering through someone's driveway full of old, forgotten stuff that probably should have gone straight to the trash. You know the kind of sale I'm talking about. The one with mismatched mugs, half-used candles, and old VHS tapes of movies no one's watched in decades. I didn't even know why I was there, to be honest. Emily was at her sister's for the weekend, so I guess I was just killing time. Anyway, that's where I saw it. The phone. It wasn't anything special, really. Just a beat-up flip phone from like 2005. The thing looked like it had been through hell and back, with scratches all over and one of those tiny worn-out screens you'd barely be able to text on. I don't know what made me pick it up, but the second I did, this weird old guy running the sale glanced up at me with this blank look, like he didn't care if I bought it or not. I was about to put it back down when he finally said something, real quiet, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. It still works, if you're interested. Now, I'm not someone who believes in weird stuff. Ghosts? Nope. Curses? Nah. I didn't really think much of the guy's tone either, but I was curious. Besides, I figured it might be kind of fun to have a throwback to the days when people actually used buttons on their phones. So, I bought the thing for $10, tossed it in my pocket, and didn't think twice about it. That night, the rain was still coming down in sheets, and I remember sitting on my couch just mindlessly scrolling through my actual phone, not the ancient flip one I'd picked up earlier. I didn't even bother trying to turn the old phone on. I mean, the thing had to be dead. Right? It was probably missing its charger anyway. But then, at exactly 3:03 a.m. it rang. Yeah, the flip phone. The one I never turned on. It rang like it had full bars of service, like it had been working this whole time. Now, part of me thought I was just hearing things, like maybe my real phone had buzzed and my tired brain got confused. But nope. The old flip phone was right there on my nightstand, vibrating like crazy and ringing with this old-school tone that sounded so out of place in my bedroom. I hesitated. Sure. I mean, who wouldn't? I just bought the thing at a yard sale a few hours earlier, and it definitely shouldn't have been working. But curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open, put it to my ear, and said, "Hello?" What I heard next, well, it didn't make any sense. On the other end of the line, there was static at first, just this low crackling noise that you might hear on an old radio. Then, through the static, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Jack? Jack, it's me? Ben." For a second, I just sat there trying to process it. Ben? As in my best friend from high school, Ben? The same Ben who died in that car accident 20 years ago? I didn't know what to say. I mean, how the hell do you respond to something like that? But before I could even try to speak, Ben kept talking, his voice cutting through the static like he was standing right next to me. "Jack, you there? I've been trying to reach you. I need to tell you something." Now I know what you're thinking. There's no way it could have been Ben. He was gone, dead. But I swear on my life, it was him. Same voice, same tone. Even that stupid way he used to draw out my name when he wanted my attention. I finally managed to say, "Ben, are you serious right now?" Because honestly, part of me was still thinking this had to be some kind of messed up prank. But how would anyone even know about the phone? I'd literally just bought it that day, and the guy who sold it to me looked like he barely knew what year it was, let alone how to pull off a prank. Ben didn't answer my question, though. Instead, his voice started to break up, the static getting worse. All I caught was, "I've been waiting. You have to listen. I never got the chance to tell you." And then the line went dead. I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, not sure what the hell had just happened. There was no way it could have been Ben, right? He'd been gone for 2 decades. And yet, I heard him. That was his voice. I closed the phone, tossed it on my nightstand, and told myself it had to be some sort of bizarre trick. Maybe someone hacked the phone or rigged it somehow. I don't know. It was late and I was tired. I decided I'd figure it out in the morning, maybe take the phone apart to see what was going on. But then it happened again. The next night, same time, 3:03 a.m., the phone rang. This time, though, it wasn't Ben. It was my mom. Yeah, my mom. The mom who died last year. Her voice was softer than Ben's had been, but I recognized it immediately. "Jack, honey, are you okay?" I froze, staring at the phone like it was some sort of alien device. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but there was no denying it. That was my mother's voice, as clear as day. "Mom?" I said, barely able to get the word out. "Mom, is that really you?" She didn't answer my question, just like Ben hadn't. Instead, she sounded worried. "Jack, you need to be careful. Something's coming, something bad. You have to listen to me." And then, just like before, the line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. In fact, I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole next day. These weren't just random voices. These were people I knew. People I'd loved and lost. But how was this even possible? How was I getting calls from the dead? Alright, so after that second call, I'll be honest, I didn't know what to do with myself. I mean, what do you do when you've just spoken to your dead best friend and your dead mom in the span of 2 nights? At first, I thought, maybe I was losing it. Maybe I hadn't really been sleeping well since Mom passed. Maybe the stress from work was finally catching up with me. Hell, maybe I just spent too much time alone since Emily had been spending more weekends with her sister. But man, no matter how many excuses I tried to come up with, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was real. I wasn't imagining it. The calls were happening. So, naturally, I did what any rational person would do. I tried to ignore it. For a few days, I didn't touch the phone. I left it face down on my nightstand and pretended it wasn't there. I mean, part of me thought if I didn't answer, the calls would just stop, right? Maybe it was some glitch or trick of my mind, and if I didn't give it any attention, it would fade away on its own. Of course, it didn't. The phone rang again, every single night like clockwork, 3:03 a.m., every damn time, and it was always that same ringtone, that old school jingle that sounded so out of place in the middle of the night. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep because I knew it was coming. I'd lie there, just staring at the ceiling, waiting for it. Waiting for the ring. And when I say waiting, I mean dreading. It wasn't like the calls scared me at first. I mean, yeah, it was weird and unsettling, but I wasn't terrified of them. I was just exhausted. It felt like I couldn't escape it, you know? Like I was stuck in this never-ending loop of conversations I didn't want to have. Then came the night I decided to pick up again. I hadn't planned on answering. I swear I hadn't. But that night, I was just, I don't know, frustrated, curious, maybe a little of both. The rain was coming down hard again, just like the first night, and I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, hearing the phone start its stupid little tune. Something in me just snapped. I was done with the guessing and the ignoring. So I reached over, flipped the phone open, and said, "All right, who is it this time?" There was static again like before, but this time it wasn't Ben or my mom. No, this voice was different, female, but not anyone I knew. She sounded older, maybe in her late 50s, with this tired, raspy tone that made it hard to hear her clearly. Jack, can you hear me?" I didn't recognize the voice at all. "Who is this?" "I'm Evelyn. I've been trying to warn you." Now that stopped me in my tracks. Warn me? About what? And how the hell did she even know my name? The hair on the back of my neck prickled as she spoke, but I tried to stay calm, tried to sound as casual as possible. "What do you mean, warn me?" Evelyn sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, like she'd been trying to reach me for a long time. "That phone, it's not what you think. It's not just some old flip phone, Jack. It's a connection, a link to the other side, and every time you answer, you get pulled in a little more." "Pulled in? What the hell was that supposed to mean?" "Listen," she continued, her voice getting more urgent. "You're being drawn in. Every call, every conversation, it's taking you closer to the deadline. Once you cross it, there's no coming back." The deadline? What the hell was she talking about? It all sounded like some kind of twisted ghost story, but there was something in her tone that made it hard to dismiss her completely. I could feel my heart starting to pound a little harder as she spoke, but I tried to keep my cool. "So what do I do?" I asked, trying to sound calm, even though every part of me wanted to throw the phone out the window and never look at it again. "How do I stop this?" There was a long pause. I could hear the static growing louder on her end, like something was trying to cut her off. "You have to destroy it," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "It's the only way. Don't answer any more calls, Jack. Whatever you do, don't pick up again." And just like that, the line went dead. I sat there in my dark bedroom, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to wrap my head around what I just heard. Destroy the phone? That was the solution? Just smash it and walk away? Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part of me was curious. I mean, what if she was wrong? What if I destroyed the phone and never got the chance to talk to Ben or my mom again? What if I could ask them the things I never got to ask? Say the things I never got to say? But then again, what if she was right? What if I was already too far in? The next night, I didn't touch the phone. I didn't answer, didn't even look at it. But it rang, at exactly 3:03 a.m., just like always. I lay there in the dark, listening to it ring, feeling this strange mix of relief and dread. The urge to pick it up was so strong, stronger than it had been before, like something inside me was being pulled toward it. But I didn't, not that night. The next night, though, that was a different story. So, the night after Evelyn's call, I still hadn't destroyed the phone, even though I told myself I would. Yeah, judge me if you want, but I was torn. On one hand, I knew I should have just smashed the thing, tossed it in the trash, and moved on with my life. But on the other hand, I couldn't. Not yet. Part of me was still holding on to the idea that maybe these calls, as weird as they were a chance. An impossible, surreal chance to reconnect with people I'd lost. It's easy to say I should have just walked away, but you don't know what it's like until you're the one hearing your dead friend's voice on the other end of a phone line. Or your mom's voice. You start to think, what if? What if there's something they need to say? Something I need to hear? And what if I'm the idiot who breaks the phone and never finds out? Anyway, I made it one more night without answering. But by the time the next evening rolled around, I was already losing the battle with myself. Emily wasn't back yet, so it was just me and my thoughts. Bad combo. The rain was coming down again, hammering against the windows, and I could feel that stupid phone sitting there on my nightstand, practically daring me to pick it up. It rang right on schedule. 3:03 a.m., I stared at it, telling myself, don't answer, but my hand was already reaching for it. I flipped it open without thinking, like it was just an automatic reflex at this point. "Hello?" The voice on the other end, Ben again. But this time, he didn't sound like the laid-back kid I used to know. He sounded scared. "Jack, man, you gotta help me," he said, his voice cracking through the static. "I'm stuck. I'm not supposed to be here." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Not supposed to be here? Where the hell was here, and what did he mean by stuck? "Ben, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" There was more static, but I could hear him, just barely. "It's this place, Jack. It's not what you think. They won't let me leave." They? I had no idea what he was talking about. Who were they? And why was Ben acting like he was trapped somewhere? I started to get this sinking feeling, like maybe Evelyn wasn't just some crackpot after all. Maybe there was something to what she said about the phone being a connection to the other side, and maybe, just maybe, I was in way over my head. Before I could ask anything else, Ben's voice cut through the static again. "Don't trust the phone, Jack. They're using it. They're using me." And then, just like that, the line went dead. I sat there for a while, just holding the phone, trying to make sense of it all. I mean, what was I supposed to do with that? Ben was dead. I knew that, but he was talking to me like he was still out there, trapped somewhere. And who the hell were they? I didn't have long to think about it because the phone rang again, almost immediately. I nearly dropped it when it started buzzing in my hand. This time, I was too freaked out to answer, but when I looked at the screen, I saw a name I wasn't expecting. My dad. Now you've got to understand something. I hadn't spoken to my dad in over 10 years, not since he bailed on my mom and me when I was a teenager. He'd skipped town, got mixed up with some shady people, and the next thing I heard, he died in some bar fight a few states away. I didn't even go to his funeral. So yeah, seeing his name pop up on that phone, that was a whole other level of messed up. But like an idiot, I answered, "Dad?" There was a long pause on the other end, just static for what felt like forever, and then I heard his voice, low and gravelly, just like I remembered. "Jack, I don't have much time." I didn't even know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell at him, tell him he had no right to call me after everything he'd done. But another part of me, the part that had spent years wondering why he left, needed to hear what he had to say. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he said, his voice barely audible over the crackling static. "I've been trying to reach you, tried for years, but I couldn't get through, until now." I felt a knot forming in my throat. "What do you mean, until now? What are you talking about?" There was another long pause, and then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "The phone, Jack. It's not just a phone, it's a bridge. Every time you answer, you're letting them in. You have to stop, before it's too late." I wanted to ask him who they were, the same way I'd wanted to ask Ben, but before I could say anything, the static swallowed his voice, and the line went dead. Again, I sat there in the dark, staring at the phone like it was some kind of cursed object. And maybe it was. I mean, what was I supposed to think at that point? My dead best friend and my dead father were both telling me the same thing. The phone isn't just a phone. I wish I could tell you I smashed the damn thing right then and there, but I didn't. I couldn't. Part of me still needed answers. I needed to know what was really going on. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to where it all started. The next morning, I drove to the address where I'd bought the phone. I figured maybe the old man who sold it to me could tell me something, anything, that might explain all this. Maybe he'd heard something like this before. Maybe it was some kind of urban legend or prank that got out of hand. I didn't know. But when I got there, the place was empty. No yard sale, no old man. Just a rundown house with the windows boarded up, like no one had lived there for years. The whole thing was starting to feel like a bad dream. That's when I realized something. If this was happening to me, maybe it had happened to someone else before. Someone who'd owned the phone before I did. So I started digging. I searched online, looked through forums about haunted objects and weird paranormal experiences. I even reached out to a few people who wrote about similar stories. And that's when I found out something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first person to get calls from the dead on that phone. Not by a long shot. I'm telling you, once I found out I wasn't the only person who had gone through this, the whole situation became 100 times worse. I thought maybe I was just losing my grip, that this was some weird one-off thing, but no, turns out this phone had a history, and it wasn't a good one. I dug up old posts and forums and even found a couple of newspaper clippings online. The phone had passed through a few hands before it landed in mine, and, well, let's just say none of those stories ended with happily ever after. There was one guy, some mechanic from Ohio, who apparently lost his mind after talking to his dead wife for weeks. The cops found him barricaded in his basement, muttering about bridges and being pulled through. Then there was this woman, a nurse from Texas. Same thing. She got calls from her sister who died in a fire, and a few months later, she vanished without a trace. And then there was the most recent owner before me. This was the part that made my skin crawl. The old man who sold me the phone, he'd only had it for a week, and then he just decided to hand it off to the first poor sucker who showed up at his yard sale, which, lucky me, was yours truly. But here's the kicker. I couldn't find any record of the old man after that. No obituary, no death notice. It was like he'd disappeared. Now, most people with half a brain would have chucked that phone into the ocean and never looked back. But I guess I've always been a bit of an idiot. Or maybe it was that same curiosity that killed all those cats. Whatever the reason, I still had the phone, and I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I kept answering the calls, I could figure out what was happening. Maybe even stop it before I ended up like all those other people. Part of me still thought I could somehow control this thing, like I had any say in what was happening. Spoiler alert, I didn't. So that night, as the rain poured down in sheets, I waited for the call again. It had become a routine by now. 3:03 a.m., the phone would buzz, and I'd answer, ready for whatever new voice from beyond was going to give me cryptic warnings or unfinished business. But this time was different. The phone rang at 3:03, just like always. I flipped it open, but when I said hello, there was no static this time. No delay, no voice struggling to break through the crackling interference. Instead, there was silence. Complete, eerie silence. I said hello, again, thinking maybe it was a connection or something. But then I heard it. Not a voice, not exactly, but this sound, almost like a deep rhythmic breathing. Someone, or something, was on the other end, listening. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I didn't hang up. For some reason, I couldn't. I was locked in, waiting, hoping that whoever was there would finally speak. Then, just when I thought maybe it was another trick of the phone, I heard a voice. Not Ben's, not my mom's, not anyone I recognized. It was low and cold, like ice scraping across pavement. "You're almost there, Jack." I didn't say anything at first. I was too stunned, too freaked out by the voice. It sounded like no one I'd ever spoken to before. Calm, emotionless, like they were stating a fact, not a warning. A fact. "Who is this?" I finally asked, my voice shaky, barely able to get the words out. "You've been answering, haven't you? Every time. You've been crossing the threshold." "What threshold?" I was starting to lose my grip on the whole thing. "What the hell are you talking about?" The voice chuckled, this low, guttural laugh that made my stomach flip. "There's no turning back now. You've let them all in. Soon, you'll be one of them." I felt a chill run through me. One of them. What did that even mean? I started to say something, anything, but the voice cut me off. "You should have listened to Evelyn. You can't destroy the phone, Jack. It's too late." And then the call ended. Just like that. I stared at the phone in my hand, the small screen fading to black, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Things had just gone from bad to worse. I didn't know what the hell the voice meant by threshold or letting them in, but it couldn't be good. I thought back to Evelyn's warning, her plea for me to destroy the phone, and I wondered if I had already missed my chance. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I didn't even try. I just sat there, listening to the rain hammering against the windows, my mind racing. Was I already too far gone? Was I being dragged into whatever place Ben had talked about? Whatever my dad had warned me about. I had to figure it out, and I had to do it fast. The next morning, I packed a bag and hit the road, headed to the one place that might have answers, my childhood hometown, the place where Ben had died. It had been years since I'd been back there, but I knew I had to go. Maybe if I retraced the steps, if I went back to where it all began, I could find some way to stop this. I drove through the pouring rain, my thoughts spinning the whole way. The memories of that night, the night Ben died, started coming back in flashes. The accident, the phone calls I'd missed, the guilt I'd buried deep down. Part of me had always wondered if there was something more I could have done back then. If I'd just picked up the phone when Ben called that night, maybe things would have been different. Maybe he'd still be alive. By the time I pulled into my old hometown, the rain had eased up, but the skies were still heavy with dark clouds, like something was hanging over the whole place. I drove past the old high school, the park where we used to hang out, and finally to the spot where the accident had happened. There it was, still the same after all these years. The bend in the road where Ben's car had skidded off, the rusted guardrail, the patch of trees that had swallowed him up. I parked the car and got out, walking toward the edge of the road, feeling like I was stepping into the past. And then my phone rang. Not my regular phone, the flip phone. 3:03 p.m. So there I was, standing on the side of that old, familiar road, the one that had haunted me for years, and the flip phone was buzzing in my pocket. But this time, it wasn't the middle of the night. It was the middle of the damn afternoon. 3:03 p.m., exactly 12 hours off from the usual. That alone freaked me out. I pulled the phone out, staring at it, knowing I should just throw it into the woods, walk away and never look back. But of course I didn't. I answered it. "Hello?" My voice came out a lot shakier than I'd like to admit. This time it was my dad again, and let me tell you, his voice wasn't like it had been before. It was desperate, strained, like he was shouting from a long way off. "Jack, you have to stop. You're already too close." "Too close to what?" I snapped, feeling that frustration bubble up. I was tired, confused, and more than a little scared by this point. "What the hell is going on?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "I tried to warn you, but it's stronger than you know. Every call, every time you've picked up, you've been opening the door wider. They're coming, Jack. They're almost through." My blood was running cold now. Who's coming?" "The ones on the other side," he said. "The ones who've been waiting." I couldn't make sense of it. Wasn't this whole thing about the dead? Wasn't the phone supposed to connect me to people I'd lost? But from the way my dad was talking, it sounded like something else entirely. Something worse. Then, before I could ask anything else, he said, "You've let them all in, Jack. They've crossed the deadline." And that's when I heard it. Not through the phone, but all around me. A sound like voices, whispers, echoing from the woods, from the road, from everywhere. Low, muttering voices getting louder and louder like a crowd gathering. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. I spun around, looking into the trees, half expecting to see someone or something there. But it was just shadows, shifting between the branches. The whispers got louder, and I swear I could almost make out words, but not quite. It was like they were right on the edge of being clear, but always just out of reach. That's when it hit me. Evelyn had warned me about this. Ben had warned me. Even my dad had tried. And I'd been too stubborn, too curious, too damn stupid to listen. I'd been answering those calls, letting whatever was on the other side get closer with each one. I turned back toward the road, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out of there. But before I could take a step, the phone rang again. 3:04 p.m. I don't know why, but I answered. Maybe I thought it would be Evelyn telling me how to fix this. Maybe I hoped it would be Ben saying he was okay. Or maybe I just lost it entirely at this point. Either way, I flipped the phone open, and the voice on the other end? It wasn't Ben. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my dad. It was me. My own voice came crackling through the line, cold and emotionless. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack. You should have stopped." I felt my stomach drop. "Who are you?" "You know who I am." The voice that was mine, but somehow not mine, spoke slowly, like it was savoring each word. "I'm the one who takes over when you cross the deadline." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think straight. This had gone beyond anything I could have ever imagined. "You've been letting us in, Jack. We've been waiting all this time, and now you've made it possible." "Made what possible?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The voice chuckled softly. "The crossing. You've opened the door. Now we come through." And I was left standing there, holding it in my hand, feeling like the ground was slipping out from under me. The whispers were louder now, so loud that they felt like they were all around me, closing in. I didn't know what was real anymore. I ran back to my car, not even thinking about where I was going, just knowing I needed to get the hell out of there. But as I slammed the door and turned the key, something flickered in the rearview mirror. I glanced up, and for a split second I saw something. A face. My face. Only it wasn't me. The eyes were wrong, too dark, too hollow. The skin was pale, almost gray. It grinned at me with this twisted, knowing smile, and then it was gone, like it had never been there. I didn't wait. I floored it, the tires screeching as I sped down the road, the rain pounding against the windshield. I don't even remember the drive home, honestly. It's all a blur. When I finally got back to my place, I didn't even bother to unpack my bag. I went straight upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed the phone, and headed for the backyard. I had no plan, no real idea of what I was doing. I just knew I needed to destroy that phone. I couldn't risk answering it again. I grabbed a hammer from the shed and smashed the phone into pieces. It didn't take much. The thing was old, brittle, practically falling apart already. But as I stood there in the rain, looking down at the broken pieces scattered across the grass, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late, that I hadn't stopped anything. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The house felt different. Empty, but not in a comforting way. It was like there was something lurking just beyond the walls, just out of sight. Then, at 3:03 a.m., my regular phone rang. I didn't want to look, but I did. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated for a long time, my hand trembling over the phone. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew what it meant if I did. But then, just as I was about to put it down, I noticed something else. A text message. One word. Soon. And that's when I realized it didn't matter if I'd smashed the flip phone. The deadline wasn't a thing you could just destroy with a hammer. I'd already crossed it, and now, well, now it's just a matter of time. I still don't know who or what I let in, but whatever it is, it's coming. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this story, and that you're feeling calm and at ease. As the rain begins to fall, allow the gentle sounds to guide you into a peaceful slumber. You can stay here, let the night wrap around you, and drift away. Or, if you're still awake, feel free to explore more stories hidden deep in the shadows. Good night, and sweet dreams.